The new sign was halfway up the brick when Dennis Mercer stepped out of his truck and shouted, "What the hell is that?" Ruth stood on the sidewalk with one hand shielding her eyes. The sign hung from two ropes above the old green awning, rocking gently, while the installer guided it toward the brackets. Ruth's Market, it said in cream letters on a deep blue background. Dennis left his truck door open in the street. "Take it down." The installer looked at Ruth. He was 60 if he was a day, with a gray ponytail and the cautious expression of a man who had wandered into a family argument while holding expensive equipment. "Keep going," Ruth said. Dennis stopped beside her. For 7 weeks he had spoken softly, as though she were a widow at the edge of a nervous collapse. Now his face had color in it. "You bought the building," he said. "You didn't buy the right to erase Dad." People had begun watching from the laundromat across the street. Ruth could feel them pretending not to. "I'm not erasing him. His name was on that building for 52 years, and mine was behind the counter for 15. Dennis stared at her. The sign rose another foot. What he asked next came out quieter. "Ruthie, why are you doing this to us?" 7 weeks earlier, he had been carving Walter Mercer's funeral ham. He stood at the kitchen counter in their father's apartment, sawing through the spiral slices with the concentration of a surgeon. Dennis believed every problem had one proper tool and one proper way to hold it. He had brought his own carving knife from home because Walter's knives were, in his opinion, an insult to meat. "People are going to want sandwiches," he said. "There are rolls on the table," Ruth told him. "These are dinner rolls. They're round, Dennis. They'll manage." He gave her the look older brothers saved from childhood, the one that said she was being difficult, mainly because he was right. The apartment smelled of coffee, ham glaze, and the lilies Elaine had ordered from Cincinnati. The lilies were huge and waxy, more suitable for the funeral of a senator than an 88-year-old grocer who had spent his last years complaining that store-bought tomatoes had no character. Ruth had slept 3 hours. She had worn the navy dress Dennis's wife Susan said was always safe, and now the zipper pressed between her shoulder blades. Everyone else had changed into comfortable clothes after the burial. Ruth had not had time. She had come upstairs, set out plates, found the mustard, brewed 2 pots of coffee, and cleared Walter's pill organizer from the windowsill before anyone could see the Tuesday compartment still full. Walter had died on a Tuesday. He had complained about the oatmeal at 7:15, taken half his pills at 7:30, and asked Ruth whether she had locked the market's back door. At 8:20, she found him in his chair with one hand resting on the blanket she had tucked over his knees. For the first 2 days afterward, she kept waking at the times his medicine was due. Elaine came through the kitchen carrying a stack of paper plates against her chest. At 59, she had silver blonde hair that always looked freshly brushed, even in rain. "There you are," she said. "I've been trying to get you alone. I live here. It shouldn't be that hard." Elaine smiled carefully. Since arriving, she had been touching Ruth whenever she passed, an arm, a shoulder, the back of her hand. It was meant as comfort, but after 11 years of lifting Walter, washing Walter, steadying Walter, Ruth's skin felt tired of being assigned a purpose. "We don't have to talk now," Elaine said. "Then don't corner her," Dennis said, still carving. "I'm not cornering anyone." "You used your funeral voice." "I do not have a funeral voice." "You absolutely have a funeral voice. You used it when Aunt Louise's cat died. That cat was 18. Ruth almost laughed. The sound rose unexpectedly and caught in her chest. Elaine saw it and brightened, as if she had accomplished something. From the living room came the low murmur of relatives and old customers. Someone had turned on the ceiling fan, and every few rotations it clicked. Walter had complained about that click for 6 years. Ruth had offered to replace the fan. He had always said there was nothing wrong with it except the click. Dennis laid slices of ham on a platter. "We ought to go over a few things while we're all together." "There," Elaine said. "That's what I was trying to say, only with some sensitivity. I'm plenty sensitive. You brought invoices to a funeral. They were in the truck already." Ruth picked up the mustard jar and wiped a yellow smear from its rim. "What things?" "The building mostly," Dennis said. "Utilities, insurance, clean out." He spoke without looking at her, which made the list feel older than the funeral. "The utilities are paid through the month," Ruth said. "Insurance renews in October. I don't mean what's due. I mean shutting everything down." The knife continued through the ham. Soft scrape against china. Slice, scrape, slice. Elaine set the plates down. No one expects you to handle all this by yourself. I've been handling it by myself. Well, yes, but now you don't have to. Ruth looked toward the hall. Walter's bedroom door was closed. She had closed it before the luncheon because the bed was unmade, his slippers still angled beneath the chair, as if his feet had just left them. Dennis had reached for the knob earlier, and Ruth had said, "Not today," sharply enough that he obeyed. "Why would we shut down the utilities?" she asked. Dennis finally looked up. "Because the building's going on the market." Something inside Ruth went very still, not shocked. Shock required surprise, and she had known the building would have to be discussed. She simply had not known the discussion had already happened without her. When did we decide that? Dennis rested both hands on the counter. It's the sensible thing. That isn't what I asked. He glanced at Elaine. Elaine folded a napkin in half, then in half again. We talked a little last night. At the motel, just generally, about selling my home. It's not your home, Dennis said, then winced. I mean, legally, it's all three of ours now. Ruth set down the mustard. Thank you for clearing that up. Come on, Ruthie. She hated the childhood name when he used it to soften bad news. Walter had called her Ruthie when he wanted coffee, after she had already sat down. Dennis lowered his voice. This place needs more work than any of us can afford. The roof was patched in March. Patched isn't repaired. Your man said it would last 2 years. My man says what people want to hear when they're standing there with a checkbook. Comforting, since he works for you. Elaine stepped between them, without physically moving, which was one of her gifts. Her voice became gentler. Dennis's jaw tightened on cue. This is exactly why we shouldn't do it today, she said. Ruth's exhausted. I'm sitting right here. We know, honey. No, you know where I'm standing? That isn't the same thing. For a moment, the kitchen sounded very loud. The faucet dripped. The fan clicked in the next room. Someone laughed near the window, unaware that 3 adult siblings had quietly returned to being 12, 14, and 8. Dennis sighed. We're trying to make this easier. For whom? His eyes moved away first. Elaine opened her purse and took out a pale green folder. She did it slowly, with the reluctance of someone producing evidence in a trial she wished had never happened. I picked up a little information, she said. Ruth did not touch the folder. On the cover, a gray-haired couple stood on a balcony holding coffee mugs. Their teeth were very white. Behind them, sunlight shone on a lawn no resident had probably been allowed to walk across. River Glen Senior Living, Ruth read. It's independent living, Elaine said quickly. Not a nursing home. They have apartments. In Kentucky. 8 minutes from me. 45 minutes from here. You wouldn't be alone. Ruth looked at her sister. Elaine's face was open and worried. That was the worst of it. There was no cruelty to push against, no smirk, no obvious selfishness. Elaine had gathered brochures because she loved Ruth. She had also chosen Ruth's city, Ruth's rooms, and the probable shape of Ruth's remaining years without once asking whether Ruth liked balconies. I'm 63, Ruth said. I know how old you are. Do you? Dennis wiped the knife with a paper towel. Nobody's saying you're ancient. Senior Living is saying it pretty clearly. It's just a name, Elaine said. You could call it something else. Can I call it prison? Ruth. All right, Kentucky. Dennis gave a short, unwilling laugh. Elaine shot him a look, but Ruth caught the corner of her sister's mouth twitching too. For half a second, the 3 of them were themselves again. Then Dennis folded the paper towel around the knife. The truth is, there's nothing keeping you here now. He said it kindly. Ruth heard the sentence as if it had come through the old speaking tube that once connected the apartment to the market below. Nothing keeping you here. 11 years reduced to the person who was gone. The church where she sometimes attended. The pharmacist who set aside Walter's preferred cough drops. The woman, 3 blocks over whose grocery bag Ruth carried upstairs every Thursday. The blue chair by the kitchen window. The marks on the pantry door where Walter had measured all 3 children until Dennis reached 6 feet and became unbearable about it. And downstairs, behind a locked door, the old market. People still knocked there. Even after Walter's hand-painted closed sign faded nearly white, they knocked. Mrs. Bell wanted eggs when the sidewalks were icy. Mr. Latham came for bread and exact change because the supermarket self-checkout made him swear. Ruth kept a folding table inside the front entrance with a cash box, 2 baskets, and whatever she could manage without pretending the store was open. Dennis knew about the table. He called it Ruth's little charity project. "I need some air," she said. Elaine reached for her. Ruth stepped aside before the hand landed. She crossed the living room, accepting murmured condolences without stopping. Walter's former butcher, a broad 70-year-old named Pete Hollis, was eating ham between 2 dinner rolls. He lifted the sandwich toward her as proof that civilization had survived Dennis's concern. At the bottom of the narrow stairs, Ruth unlocked the door to the market. The room met her with cool dust and the faint mineral smell of old brick. Afternoon light pressed through the papered windows. Empty shelves ran in shadowed rows. Walter's wooden counter stood at the front, scarred by 50 years of coins, crates, elbows, and one dropped meat cleaver nobody had ever confessed to. Beside it was Ruth's folding table, 6 cartons of eggs, 4 loaves of wheat bread, peach preserves, a coffee can holding $14.85. Someone had pushed an envelope under the door. On the front, in shaky blue ink, were the words, "For last Thursday groceries." Inside were $9 and a note. "Thank you, Ruth. I would have had crackers for supper again." She read it twice. Above her, footsteps crossed the apartment. Her family was portioning the future, wrapping leftovers, deciding what could be thrown away. Ruth went behind Walter's counter and ran her palm over the worn wood. She could still see the place as it had been. The humming coolers, the handwritten prices, her father shouting questions from the stockroom and trusting her answers without ever quite admitting he needed them. The market was in terrible shape. She had no business plan, no contractor, and no reason to believe sentiment could pay an electric bill. Still, when Dennis came down 10 minutes later and said they should call a real estate agent Monday, Ruth folded the note and put it in her pocket. "No," she said. He blinked. "No what? No agent? Not Monday? Then when?" Ruth looked across the dark store, at the empty shelves and the small table that was not empty. "I don't know yet," she said. "But I'm not disappearing just because the funeral's over." Dennis waited for her to smile, or sigh, or explain that grief had made her say something dramatic. When she did none of those things, he glanced around the market as if another person might be hiding among the shelves, with a more reasonable answer. "You can't just say no. I already did. That's not how this works. Then why did you ask when?" "I was trying to understand what you meant. I meant no." He rubbed 2 fingers across his forehead. The gesture was Walter's, though Dennis would have denied it. "All right, we don't call Monday. We wait a week. But the taxes don't wait, Ruthie. The insurance doesn't wait. Every day this place sits here, it costs all 3 of us money. Then give me a week. A week for what?" She looked at the folding table. "To think. You've had 11 years to think about this building." "No, I've had 11 years to take care of Dad in it." The answer landed. Dennis's shoulders dropped slightly, and for a moment he looked ashamed. Then the door at the top of the stairs opened. "Dennis," Elaine called. "Susan wants to know where you put the aluminum foil." "In the second drawer." We looked. "Then look in the drawer where I put it." Elaine's footsteps receded. Dennis leaned closer to Ruth. "I'm not your enemy." "I didn't say you were." "You're looking at me like I am." "I'm looking at you like you and Elaine planned my life in a motel room. We talked about options. You picked one, because somebody had to." Ruth drew the note from her pocket and folded it once more, though there was no room left to make it smaller. "I asked for a week." He watched her hands. "Fine. 1 week. But no promises after that. You can't make promises for Elaine. You think she'll want to keep paying for this place?" "I think she can speak." "Of course she can speak. She's barely stopped since 1974. That time Ruth did laugh, just once. Dennis smiled despite himself. "I heard that," Elaine called from upstairs. "You were meant to," he shouted back. Their laughter did not fix anything, but it gave them a path back up the stairs without having to declare who had won. By 5, the last funeral guest had carried away a plate covered in foil. Pete Hollis took 3 ham sandwiches and whispered to Ruth that Dennis cut them too thick. "He always did think abundance was a personality," Pete said. At the door, he put both hands around hers. The joking left his face. "Your dad was a hard old bird. He liked you. He fired me twice. He hired you 3 times. Only because nobody else could cut a pork shoulder the way he wanted. That counts as love with Dad." Pete nodded. "Suppose it does." Susan collected the lilies before leaving because Ruth had said their smell gave her a headache. Susan was a quiet, square-shouldered woman who had been married to Dennis for 36 years without absorbing his need to manage every room he entered. As Dennis carried food to the truck, Susan stood beside Ruth on the sidewalk, holding the lilies like an enormous bridal bouquet. "He means well," she said. "I know. He's also been checking property listings for 2 months." Ruth turned toward her. Susan adjusted the stems. "I thought you should know. 2 months? He didn't list anything. He just looked. Dad wasn't dead 2 months ago." "No." Susan's mouth tightened. "He wasn't." Across the street, Dennis arranged containers in the truck as if the placement of potato salad were an engineering problem. "Why is he in such a hurry?" Ruth asked. "You need to ask him. I just spent 10 minutes asking him." "No, you spent 10 minutes telling him no." Susan gave her a tired smile. Different conversation. Dennis called. "You ready?" "In a minute." He looked at his watch. Susan raised the flowers high enough to hide her mouth. "See what I live with?" Ruth smiled, but Susan's warning stayed after the truck pulled away. Elaine remained. She had packed an overnight bag despite reserving her motel room for 2 nights, explaining that Ruth should not be alone. Ruth wanted desperately to be alone and could not bring herself to say so. They washed serving dishes side by side while the evening light drained from the kitchen. Elaine scrubbed too hard at a spot of glaze. "The place I showed you has a fitness room. I saw that. And a library, 6 shelves and a ficus. You studied the picture? There wasn't much else to do while you and Dennis assigned me a balcony." Elaine dropped the sponge into the sink. "I was trying to help. Why didn't you ask me what I wanted?" "Because you never say. I say things all the time. You tell people what needs doing. You don't tell anyone what you want." Ruth reached for a towel. Maybe nobody asks long enough to hear it. Elaine's face changed. Not surrender exactly, but the first crack in certainty. "Do you want to stay here?" she asked. Ruth dried the same plate until it squeaked. "I don't know. You just told Dennis. I know what I told Dennis. I don't know if I want to stay. I know I don't want to be sent away." Elaine leaned against the counter. "Those aren't the same thing." "No." "Do you want the building?" "I asked for a week. That's what Dennis says when he doesn't have an answer. Then it must be genetic." Elaine watched her place the plate in the cabinet. "If we sell, you'd get a third. I understand fractions. You could use it for anything. Travel, a condo. You could come near me without living at River Glen." "You mean there are other prisons?" "I mean, I miss you." The words were so plain that Ruth stopped. Elaine looked down into the dishwater. "I know this week isn't about me. I know that. But I miss you, and I thought once Dad was gone, maybe I'd get my sister back." Ruth's first impulse was anger. She had not gone anywhere. Her number had remained the same. The highway ran in both directions. Then she remembered Elaine's Sunday calls. Every single Sunday, usually at 4. Ruth had often answered while cooking or sorting pills, half listening as Elaine described a neighbor, a church argument, a restaurant Dennis would hate. Sometimes Walter shouted from the other room, and Ruth ended the call without promising to ring back. "I didn't know you thought I was gone," she said. Elaine gave a small laugh. "You weren't gone. You were busy." It was not forgiveness, and it was not blame. Ruth had no place ready to put it. That night, Elaine slept in Walter's room because she insisted the sofa would hurt Ruth's back. Ruth heard her moving long after the lights went out. A drawer opened. The closet door rolled on its track. At 1 a.m, Ruth found Elaine sitting on the edge of Walter's bed with one of his plaid shirts across her knees. "I was looking for an extra blanket," Elaine said. "There are blankets in the hall cupboard, I know." Ruth sat beside her. The bedspread was brown and gold, purchased by their mother sometime during the Carter administration. Walter had refused every replacement. He said a bedspread's job was to cover a bed, not impress visitors. Elaine rubbed the cloth of the shirt between her fingers. "He never liked me very much. Of course he did. You don't have to do that." "Do what? Make him nicer because he's dead." Ruth stared at the closet. Walter's good jacket hung inside in a plastic garment bag. 3 pairs of shoes waited in a row beneath it. Order made the absence worse. "He liked you," she said. "He didn't understand you. He didn't try. No." Elaine laid the shirt beside her. "When I came last Christmas, he asked why I bothered. Do you remember?" Ruth remembered. She had told Elaine that Walter was tired, then brought out pie before the silence could harden. He was having a bad day. He was having the same day he'd had since I turned 18. Ruth looked at her sister's profile. Elaine had been the one who left first, who married a man Walter called soft because he taught music, who moved to Kentucky and learned to order wine without apologizing. Ruth had thought of her as free. It had not occurred to her that Elaine might have experienced freedom as banishment. "I'm sorry," Ruth said. Elaine nodded once. "You always stayed. I left too. You came back. He needed me. He always needed you." It sounded like envy until Ruth heard the pity in it. In the morning, Elaine made coffee too weak and toast too dark. At 8:15, a knock sounded from downstairs. Ruth froze with Walter's blue mug in her hand. Her body knew the hour before her mind did. His second pill, his complaint about morning television, the soft scrape of his chair. The knock came again. "I'll go," Ruth said. Mrs. June Bell stood beyond the market door in a purple raincoat, her white hair covered by a clear plastic scarf. At 76, she had the posture of someone permanently offended by bad service. "I'm sorry about Walter," she said. "He overcharged me for onions for 40 years. He said you squeezed them. How else was I supposed to know they were good?" June looked past Ruth toward the folding table. "You have eggs? 2 cartons left. And bread? Wheat. Wheat tastes like a paper sack." "It's what I have." June considered this. "Give it to me." Ruth placed the eggs and bread in a grocery bag. June counted out $5.30, exact to the penny. "You gonna keep doing this?" she asked. "For now." "Good. Bus stop bench is gone." "What happened to it?" "Somebody hit it." "Were you sitting on it?" "Would I be standing here if I had been?" Ruth conceded the point. After June left, Ruth remained by the door. The street outside was wet and gray. Across from the laundromat, a man rolled up the metal gate of the shoe repair shop. A delivery truck hissed at the curb. The block was not thriving, but neither was it dead. People still moved through it with errands, complaints, exact change, and no desire to drive 3 miles for a loaf of bread. Elaine came down in stocking feet, holding the Green River Glen folder. "I thought you might have escaped," she said. "Mrs. Bell needed eggs. Mrs. Bell has always needed something." She paid. That puts her ahead of Dad. Ruth glanced at the folder. "You taking that back?" "I'm putting it in the recycling. There's a bin by the rear door." Elaine crossed the old sales floor, her footsteps lifting small echoes. Halfway there, she stopped beneath a faded rectangle on the wall. What used to hang here? The Mercer's Market sign, the outside one. "I thought Dad threw it away." "It's in the back storeroom. He took it down after the bracket rusted." Elaine looked around. "God, this place is bigger than I remember." "It gets smaller when the shelves are full." "You sound like you're imagining them full." Ruth did not answer. Elaine fed the folder into the recycling bin. "What happens at the end of your week?" "I find out what the building is worth, what it costs to repair, what I have." "You mean money?" "Money would be useful. You don't have enough to buy us out." "No." Elaine's expression softened, but Ruth did not want softness yet. She walked into the back storeroom. The old sign leaned behind stacked milk crates, its green paint dulled by dust. Mercer's Market was still readable in Walter's preferred gold. The apostrophe tilted because he had painted it himself after refusing the signmaker's price. Ruth did not touch it. Her own small house in Dayton had been rented for 11 years. It was the last thing she and her husband Tom had owned together, though its pipes were old and the tenant complained about the upstairs windows every winter. Ruth had kept it because selling felt like closing a door Tom might somehow need. She had not slept there since coming back to Walter. She took out her phone and called the property agent. "Hi, Lorna," she said when the woman answered. "I need to know what the Dayton house might sell for." Elaine's head turned sharply. Ruth walked back toward the dusty front windows as she listened. Outside, June Bell passed with the eggs held against her chest and the despised wheat bread tucked under one arm. There was a pause long enough for Ruth to picture Lorna pulling the phone away and checking the name on the screen. "Sell?" Lorna said. "You've told me no for 6 years. I know. Last December, you said you'd sell that house when Cardinals learned to pay rent. They haven't? Not one check." Ruth watched rain bead on the market window. Elaine had moved closer without pretending otherwise. "I'm considering it," Ruth said. "That's all. Does Marcia know?" "Not yet." Marcia, the tenant, had lived in the Dayton house for 4 years and treated its flower beds better than Ruth ever had. Her lease ran through September. Ruth would not break it, which meant this could not happen quickly. Lorna asked questions about the roof, the windows, and whether Ruth had repaired the basement steps. Then she gave a range. The low number made Ruth's stomach tighten. The high number made Elaine sit on an empty produce crate when Ruth repeated it. "Take out your commission," Ruth said. "You always did know how to spoil a pretty number, and closing costs." Lorna gave her a less pretty number. After they hung up, Elaine folded her arms. "That's your home." "No, this is my home, or it has been. Your home with Tom." Ruth disliked the way the words went straight through her. "Tom's been dead 12 years. He doesn't need a house. That doesn't mean you have to sell it. I said I was considering it. You called a property agent during the week we buried Dad. I called because you and Dennis informed me the ground was moving." Elaine looked toward the folding table. "You'd really trade the last thing you have from Tom for this place?" Ruth looked around the dark market. "I don't know." It was the honest answer, and Elaine seemed to resent it more than a lie. Before leaving for Kentucky, Elaine wrote 3 numbers on a paper napkin: her home phone, her cell phone, and her husband Paul's cell phone. "I have all these. You don't always answer. That doesn't erase them from my phone. Call anyway." At the curb, she hugged Ruth firmly and then stood back as though checking whether she had left a mark. "I won't agree just because you sell the house," she said. "I know, and I won't disagree because Dennis does. That's almost inspiring. I'm serious. So am I." Elaine got into her car. Before closing the door, she said, "Ask what you want before you decide what it costs." Ruth watched her drive away, irritated by the sentence because it sounded useful. The market's costs arrived with less poetry. The refrigerator technician came Monday morning and opened the long dairy case with the solemnity of a coroner. He looked inside, inhaled, and stepped back. "No," he said. "That bad? I'm not saying it can't be repaired. I'm saying I won't be the man who takes your money to try." He gave her prices for used equipment, then warned her not to buy anything that had already spent 20 years humming in somebody else's store. The electrician found cloth-covered wiring in the rear wall and said, "Well, that's exciting," in a tone that meant expensive. A roofer climbed down after 15 minutes and explained that the March patch had been applied over 2 older patches, one of which appeared to involve a campaign sign. "Which campaign?" Ruth asked. "Hard to tell. Somebody who promised lower taxes. Did it work? Roof still leaks." By Wednesday, Ruth had filled 3 pages of a yellow legal pad. Essential repairs occupied the first page. Equipment took the second. The third contained figures she had circled, crossed out, and rewritten as if neatness might make them smaller. She sat at Walter's counter with a calculator. 30 years earlier, she had done the market's weekly books in this same spot, while Walter paced behind her, complaining that numbers had become unfriendly. He distrusted calculators, but distrusted mistakes more, so he allowed Ruth to use one as long as she did not leave it where customers could see. The front door rattled. A man in a brown work jacket cupped his hands to the glass. Ruth recognized him after a moment as Owen Grant, who lived above the shoe repair shop. He pointed toward the bread table. Ruth unlocked the door. "You open?" he asked. "No." He looked at the folding table. "Looks a little open. I sell a few things to neighbors. That sounds like open with fewer lights." Owen bought preserves and a carton of eggs. He glanced toward Ruth's papers, but did not ask. On his way out, he stopped beside the empty produce racks. "My mother used to send me in here for cigarettes," he said. "Your dad wouldn't sell them to me." "How old were you?" 23. He didn't approve of cigarettes. He sold cigarettes. He didn't approve of other people smoking them. Owen nodded. "That sounds like him." After he left, Ruth switched on the lights over the front third of the store. 2 bulbs flickered, 1 stayed dark. The limited light changed the room. Instead of exposing how empty it was, it gave the front shelves a boundary. She paced from the entrance to the old counter, measuring with her feet. She did not need to reopen all of it. The rear meat department could remain closed. The dead freezer cases could be removed rather than replaced. She could start with produce, dairy, bread, pantry staples, and the preserves she already made. 1 used cooler instead of 3. Shorter hours, fewer choices chosen well. On a 4th page, she wrote smaller. Then she called Pete. He arrived carrying a thermos and a metal tape measure that had belonged to Walter. "Stole this in 1987, he said. "Been waiting for the right moment to confess. You could have brought it back any day. Then it wouldn't be a confession." Pete walked the floor slowly. He had been broad in the shoulders when Ruth was young. Now he was broad everywhere and made a soft sound when he bent his knees. "You thinking groceries again?" he asked. "I'm thinking. That gets expensive, so I'm learning." He pulled the tape between two shelves. "Your dad would hate it. The expense? Somebody changing his setup. That isn't an answer. It's the one I have." Pete helped her mark which shelving could be saved. 2 units were rusted at the base. Another leaned because one leg had been propped on a flattened box of powdered donuts. Walter had believed any object could be repaired if enough cardboard was nearby. At the butcher counter, Pete rested his palm on the scarred wood. "He talked about opening right up till the end," he said. "He talked. He wouldn't let me do anything. He was scared. Dad? Old men are allowed." He didn't think so. That doesn't stop it being true. Ruth waited. Pete had the uncomfortable expression of someone who had said more than intended. Scared of what? Of coming down here and nobody needing him. Of opening the doors and finding out the town had learned to shop somewhere else. Ruth looked toward the paper-covered windows. "He told you that?" "Not in those words. He asked me once whether I thought people remembered the meat counter. Then he spent 20 minutes saying he didn't care." Walter had asked Ruth similar questions. Did the Lathams still buy pork chops on Friday? Was the new supermarket's produce any good? Had anyone taken over the bakery route? She had answered without recognizing the question beneath them. Pete snapped the tape measure closed. "You're not him, Ruth. No, you'll still be scared. I'm beginning to understand that." The first real estate valuation arrived Thursday. The building was worth less than Dennis had implied, and more than Ruth could comfortably manage. Its upstairs apartment added value. The roof and old mechanical systems took it away. Her share already belonged to her. Buying Dennis's and Elaine's would require almost everything she could net from the Dayton house, and that left repairs, equipment, initial stock, insurance, and months of expenses before the market could support itself. Ruth made columns. If she sold the house near the low estimate, paid Lorna, honored Marcia's lease, used most of her savings, and borrowed against the market after purchasing it, she might have enough. Might was doing work that numbers refused to do. Dennis came Friday carrying a cardboard box marked "Office." He had decided that waiting a week did not prevent sorting. "What's this?" Ruth asked. "Dad's business papers." "From where?" "Desk in his room." "You went through his desk?" "I was looking for the property tax records. You could have asked me. You weren't upstairs." "I live upstairs." He set the box on the counter. "We need an appraisal. I already got a valuation." His head came up. "From whom?" she told him. "That woman mostly sells houses. She also sells mixed-use property. You should have called me." "Why?" "Because I know commercial people." "Do they work for free?" "No." "Then we can compare." He stared at the legal pad. "You've been getting repair estimates." "Yes." "Ruth, what exactly are you doing?" She closed the pad. "Seeing whether I can buy your shares." For several seconds, Dennis said nothing. His gaze moved from her to the lit front shelves, then toward the dark rear of the store. With what money? The Dayton house? His expression hardened so quickly she almost stepped back. Tom's house? My house. You're going to sell your one good asset to buy a building that needs a new roof? I haven't decided. You just said you want to buy us out. I'm finding out whether I can. He shoved both hands into his jacket pockets. This is grief. Don't. It is. You're standing in Dad's store 4 days after the funeral, trying to rebuild 1998. It's been 10 days. That doesn't improve the argument? I'm not rebuilding Dad's store. What else would you call it? I don't know yet. Dennis paced to the front window and peeled back one corner of the brown paper. Outside, a woman wrestled a laundry basket from the trunk of her car. You couldn't wait to get away from this place, he said. Ruth remembered being 31, furious and newly engaged, telling Walter she would never spend another Saturday pricing canned beans. Dennis had stayed in town and helped Walter for 3 more years, though helped had meant stopping by after work, not standing behind the register. I did get away, and came back. To care for Dad. That was your choice. She felt the old, hot answer rise, but Dennis's face stopped her. He was not taunting her. He needed it to have been her choice. The alternative was that he had allowed necessity to choose for her. Yes, she said. It was. He nodded too quickly. Then don't make another bad decision because you think the family owes you. I'm not asking the family to give me anything. You'll want a discount. I'll make an offer based on the appraisal and repair costs. I need fair market value. Need, not want. Susan's warning returned. Property listings for 2 months. Ruth studied the frayed cuff of his work jacket, the tired red in his eyes. Dennis had always bought good boots and replaced them before the soles wore thin. These were cracked at both toes. "How's business?" she asked. His posture changed. "Fine." That wasn't an accusation. "I said it's fine." "Then why are you in such a hurry for the money?" He picked up the office box. "We'll meet Sunday," he said. "You, me, Elaine, bring your numbers." "Dennis?" "Fair market value, Ruthie. If you want the place, prove you can afford it." He carried the box upstairs before she could tell him to leave it. Ruth stood alone in the uneven light. On the counter lay her legal pad, the calculator, and Pete's stolen tape measure. She opened to the 4th page. Below smaller, she wrote a second word. Mine. Sunday's meeting began with Dennis moving Ruth's chair. "The light's better over here," he said. "The light is fine where it is. You'll be looking at papers." "I've been looking at papers in that chair since 2013. He moved it back. Elaine arrived with 2 blueberry muffins, a thermos of coffee, and a legal pad of her own. Paul had driven her up, but gone to visit a retired music teacher nearby, a decision Ruth suspected had less to do with friendship than survival. They sat at Walter's kitchen table. His chair remained empty at the end. No one mentioned it. Dennis had brought a folder divided by colored tabs. Ruth brought her yellow pad, 3 estimates, the valuation, and a sheet on which she had typed her proposed numbers. Elaine set the muffins in the center as though negotiations might improve if everyone had access to sugar. Dennis looked at Ruth's offer. "This is less than the valuation, by $6,000. $6,000 is less. The valuation assumes a normal listing period and takes no account of a commission. If you accept this, you get your money without waiting for a buyer. You don't have the money. I would have it when the Dayton house sells and the financing is approved. So we wait for your house instead of a buyer. You said you needed fair value, not instant value." Elaine looked from one to the other. "How much would a commission be if we listed the building?" Dennis told her. "That's more than the difference," she said. "It's not just the number. A developer could pay cash." Ruth folded her hands. "Do you have a developer?" "No." "Has one called?" "No, because we haven't listed it." "So I'm competing with an imaginary man carrying a suitcase of money. He wouldn't carry a suitcase." "Good." That was the part worrying me. Elaine hid a smile behind her coffee cup. Dennis turned to the repair estimates. He read each one twice. When he reached the electrician's report, he whistled. "You can't afford this. That's for rewiring the whole building. I only need the apartment, the front sales floor, and the storage area before opening." "Before opening," Elaine repeated. Ruth nodded. "You mean the market?" "Yes." Elaine's gaze went toward the floor, as if she could see through it. "As a grocery store?" "A small one." "Ruth, there's a Kroger 3 miles away, and a supermarket across the highway. Then why would people shop downstairs? Because neither of those places will sell Mrs. Bell 1 carton of eggs without making her cross 6 lanes of traffic. Mrs. Bell can't be your entire customer base." "Thank God," Dennis said. Ruth passed them the 4th page from her pad, now rewritten and typed. It listed a limited opening inventory, projected weekly costs, shorter operating hours, and the services she believed the neighborhood lacked. Dennis read the page in silence. Elaine said, "Half portions? A lot of people around here live alone. Everything in the supermarket is packaged for a family of 4, or someone with a chest freezer. Prepared dinners? Eventually, not at first." Dennis tapped the page. "You've got delivery written here, phone orders for a small area." "Eventually?" "Who delivers?" I said eventually. "You're using that word the way Dad used cardboard. It's holding the plan up for now." Elaine pulled the page closer. "You did all this in a week?" Pete helped with the floor plan. "Pete thinks bacon is a vegetable," Dennis said. "He knows the building. So do I. Then help." The invitation slipped out before Ruth decided whether to offer it. Dennis leaned back. "You want me to help you buy my property? I want you to tell me if I missed something. You missed the part where the business hasn't operated in 18 years. I put it under risks. This entire sheet should be under risks." His fingers struck the paper, but he did not push it away. He read it again. Ruth could almost see the argument happening behind his eyes. He wanted her plan to be foolish. He also wanted to correct it. Your utility estimate is too low, he said. Commercial service has gone up. How much? I don't know exactly. Find out. And the rear entrance needs a new fire door, whether you use that section or not. The roofer mentioned it. The roofer isn't a fire inspector. Will you price one? Elaine watched them with a puzzled expression. Are we negotiating or opening a store? Neither yet, Dennis said. He took a pen from his folder and wrote beside Ruth's utility figure. For 20 minutes, they worked. Dennis challenged the cost of shelving, then suggested a restaurant auction company that sold used fixtures. Elaine questioned whether Ruth could stand behind a counter 8 hours a day. Ruth said she could not, and changed the proposed hours. Elaine volunteered to compare point-of-sale systems, then acted offended when both siblings stared at her. I buy things, she said. I understand paying. You write checks at the grocery store, Dennis said. They take checks because they trust me. They take checks because they want you to leave. The old rhythm almost carried them past the problem. Then Dennis reached the page showing the funds Ruth expected from selling the Dayton house. His pen stopped. You're counting the high estimate, the middle, before repairs. Lorna thinks the house should be listed as it is. Of course she does. She gets paid either way. Ruth looked at his colored tabs. How much do you need? The question changed the room. Elaine lowered her pen. Dennis closed the folder, though several pages remained on the table. This isn't about me. It became about you when Susan told me you'd been watching listings before Dad died. His face reddened. Susan had no business discussing that. She thought I should know. I was checking values. Why? Because we knew this was coming. No, Elaine said quietly. We knew Dad would die. We didn't know what you needed. Dennis stood and carried his coffee to the sink. Walter's chair blocked the direct path, and he had to walk around it. My business had a bad quarter. Ruth waited. 2 bad quarters, he said. How bad? Elaine asked. I'm not bankrupt, if that's what you're asking. It wasn't. It was in your voice. Elaine's voice sharpened. I'm not the one who arranged a property sale before the funeral. I didn't arrange anything. You moved pretty fast. Because delay costs money. I'm sorry if understanding that makes me the villain. Ruth heard the fear beneath his anger now. It did not make his behavior kinder. It made it legible. What happened? She asked. Dennis looked out the window over the sink. 2 contractors haven't paid. 1 probably won't. I bought materials for jobs that got pushed. Payroll doesn't care. How much would my offer help? He gave a short laugh. I'm not discussing my company books with you. You're discussing mine. That's different. Because you're trying to open a grocery store with no grocery store. Elaine pushed her muffin toward him. Sit down. I don't want a muffin. It isn't a reward. He sat. They agreed on an appraisal from someone none of them had chosen before. They agreed Ruth would have 30 days to secure financing after the Dayton house went under contract. Dennis insisted the market remain available for inspection if Ruth's financing failed. Ruth insisted no listing would be signed during her 30 days. Elaine listened to both and then said, I agree to sell my share to Ruth at the appraised number, minus what we would have paid in commission. Dennis stared at her. We haven't seen the appraisal. That's why I said the appraised number. You drove up here undecided. I changed my mind. Because she made muffins sound expensive? Because she has a plan. She has 4 pages. It's 4 more than we brought. Ruth looked at Elaine. You don't have to do this because you feel guilty. I'm not. Or because you miss me. I can miss you and still think. Dennis muttered. First time for everything. Elaine ignored him. If Ruth buys it, Dad's building stays in the family. If she fails, then she deals with that. We don't get to stop her from making a mistake because we'd prefer a mistake with a balcony. Ruth felt the words settle inside her, both support and warning. Dennis rubbed the side of his thumb over a scratch in the table. If you reopen, you keep the Mercer name. It was not phrased as a question. The business would be mine, Ruth said. The building was Dad's. The store was Dad's. That name is the only reason anybody would come back. Maybe. What does that mean? It means I haven't chosen a name. Dennis looked genuinely bewildered. It already has one. Ruth glanced toward the kitchen floor. Below it, the old green sign leaned behind the milk crates. I'll think about it. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Money had forced him to choose which argument he needed most. For the moment, he chose the sale. Ruth drove to Dayton the next afternoon. Marcia met her at the house wearing gardening gloves and a straw hat. She was 67, recently retired from a dental office, and had painted the front door red without permission. Ruth had never objected because Tom once wanted a red door, and she had talked him into gray. "I knew something was up when Lorna called," Marcia said. "I'm sorry, are you evicting me?" "No, your lease stays through September. If it sells before then, the buyer honors it. And after? I can't promise." Marcia nodded. She did not make Ruth's decision easier by becoming unreasonable. They walked through the house. The upstairs windows still stuck. A water stain marked the dining room ceiling, where Tom had once stepped through the attic floor while trying to install insulation. Ruth could hear his voice from that day. "Don't come up here, honey, unless you got a new husband with you." In the small back bedroom, sunlight fell across the hardwood in a pale rectangle. Ruth and Tom had kept a desk there. After he died, she sorted bills at that desk, while pretending not to see his reading glasses beside the lamp. Marcia had turned the room into a sewing space. Spools of thread stood in cheerful rows where the glasses had been. "You love this house," Marcia said. "Yes. You can still sell something you loved." Ruth looked at her. Marcia removed one glove. "That was free. Any more wisdom, I charge by the hour." Lorna arrived with listing papers and a folder of comparable sales. They sat at Tom's old kitchen table, which Ruth had included with the rental because she could not bear to move it. The price they chose was not a fortune. After costs, it would cover most of what Ruth needed to pay Dennis and Elaine, not the work afterward. The rest would have to come from her savings and a loan secured by a building whose roof contained political history. Lorna slid the agreement across the table. Ruth signed. On her way out, she paused at the red door and pressed her palm against it. The house did not feel like Tom. That was the truth she had avoided for 11 years. It felt like Marcia's lemon cleaner, Marcia's sewing thread, and the basil growing in Marcia's chipped pots. Tom was in the joke about the ceiling. He was in Ruth's habit of buying the expensive coffee when she was frightened. He was not waiting for her in an empty room. She locked the door and handed Lorna the spare key. Then she kept one key for herself, because choosing did not mean it didn't hurt. The coffee Ruth bought on the drive back cost $4.90. She ordered the large, then heard Tom's voice object to paying $5 for hot water that had met a bean. She drank it anyway. At the credit union the next morning, she sat across from a loan officer named Janice Webb, who wore red glasses and had no sentimental attachment to grocery stores. Janice read Ruth's 4 pages, the repair estimates, the building valuation, and the Dayton listing agreement. She asked how much Ruth had in savings. Ruth told her. "How much of that are you prepared to use?" "Not all of it." "How much?" Ruth gave a number. Janice circled it. "Why stop there?" "Because I'm 63, the market won't pay me immediately, and my car makes a noise no mechanic has been willing to name." Janice nodded. "Good answer." "It is?" "People who offer every dollar they have usually expect enthusiasm to cover the electric bill." Ruth shifted in the chair. "Can you finance it?" "I can't answer that today." Dennis would have disliked Janice on principle. The market building offered enough collateral to make a loan possible, especially once Ruth owned all of it. The apartment produced no rental income because Ruth lived there, and a grocery with no sales history was not a business the credit union could value. Janice suggested treating the first loan as property financing, with a smaller equipment line only after Ruth provided firm quotes. "You're saying the building is more believable than I am. I'm saying the building has bricks. So do I, some mornings." Janice's mouth moved slightly. "Your Dayton house needs a buyer. We need the independent appraisal, and these projections need work. What's wrong with them?" "You've underestimated spoilage. You're the third person to say my costs are low. I'm hoping repetition helps." Janice also wanted a formal business name. Ruth looked at the blank line on the application. Her pen hovered. Mercer's Market would be easy. It was familiar, defensible, and already belonged to people's memories. She could hear Dennis saying that the name was the only goodwill the business had. She wrote Mercer, stopped after the R, and drew a line through it. "Can I leave that blank?" "For today." The appraisal came in 2 days later, slightly below the earlier valuation. Dennis called within 12 minutes of receiving it. That man ignored the upstairs storage. He measured it. He valued it wrong. You wanted an independent appraiser. I wanted a competent one. The roof lowered the value. The roof is serviceable. Campaign signs aren't a recognized building material. Dennis was silent. "You knew?" Ruth asked. Dad patched that section himself. With a campaign sign? It was coated cardboard. Whose campaign? I don't remember. Did they win? No. That explains the leak. He tried not to laugh. She could hear the effort in his breathing. The lower appraisal reduced what she owed him and Elaine, but it also reduced what the credit union was willing to lend. Ruth revised numbers until the legal pad looked wounded. The Dayton house had 3 showings the first week. One visitor disliked the upstairs windows. Another wanted Marcia out before closing. The third made an offer below the asking price and requested money toward replacing a furnace that worked perfectly well. Ruth declined. You may not get a cleaner offer, Lorna warned. Then I'll get a dirtier one that pays more. You've become difficult. I was always difficult. I was just busy. While the house waited, Ruth began clearing the market. Pete helped remove the worst shelves and complained theatrically about every screw. Owen Grant came in for preserves and returned with a hand truck. Mrs. Bell stationed herself near the entrance and told them which fixtures Walter should have thrown away in 2002. You're not lifting that, Pete said when Ruth bent for the end of a metal rack. I lifted Dad. Your dad didn't have sharp edges. You didn't know him well enough. She lifted anyway, made it 4 steps, and felt a bright pull in her lower back. Pete did not say, I told you so. He made the silence say it for him. The restaurant auction took place in an old banquet hall outside town. Ruth went looking for a cooler and affordable shelving. She found 37 dining chairs, a mechanical bull, 2 chocolate fountains, and enough stainless steel pans to feed the state legislature. The cooler she wanted stood near the loading doors. It was a 3-door model with glass fronts, only 6 years old, according to the auction sheet. Ruth opened it and smelled disinfectant. Don't, a woman beside her said. Ruth turned. The woman was short, with close-cropped gray curls, gold hoop earrings, and a canvas tote that read, Feed people, not egos. Don't smell it? Don't bid. Why? The woman crouched and pointed toward the compressor housing. Fresh screws, scratches around the panel. Somebody's been in there recently. That might mean it was repaired. It might mean they did enough to make it cold until 4 o'clock. Ruth studied the cooler. You know refrigeration? I know cafeteria equipment. Refrigeration is the part that wakes you at 3 in the morning. The woman held out her hand. Camille Price. Ruth Mercer. You the one reopening Walter Mercer's place? Ruth glanced around. How does everybody know that? You had Pete Hollis dragging shelves onto the sidewalk. That man can turn manual labor into a press release. Camille had managed the cafeteria at a manufacturing plant for 21 years. The company outsourced food service in January, and the new contractor offered her a position with fewer hours, less pay, and a supervisor who called employees team members while cutting their benefits. So I retired, she said. You don't sound retired. I'm resting angrily. Camille led Ruth to a 2-door cooler farther down the row. It was older and less attractive, with solid doors and a dent near the bottom. That one's ugly, Ruth said. So are most things that keep working. The auctioneer started with tables. Camille had come for sheet pans and a commercial mixer for a church kitchen, though she admitted the church had not authorized the mixer. They authorized a budget, she said. That's close enough. Ruth bought the ugly cooler for $400 less than she had budgeted. Camille bought the pans, but lost the mixer to a man who bid as though cake production were a moral contest. Afterward, they drank burnt coffee from foam cups while waiting for invoices. You have food service experience? Camille asked. Grocery. A long time ago. Different animal, I know. You making prepared food? Eventually? Camille rolled her eyes. Everybody says eventually when they mean they haven't priced labor. Ruth pulled the folded business sheet from her purse. I priced some labor. Camille read it without being invited. Her finger moved down the columns. You don't have waste. People keep telling me. Because food goes bad whether you believe in it or not. Your produce number is too high for your traffic. You'll spend your nights making soup out of guilt. I make preserves. Same guilt, more sugar. Ruth laughed. Camille turned the page over and began writing. Start with fewer varieties. Don't stock 6 kinds of lettuce so people can admire your ambition. Cabbage keeps, carrots keep, apples don't panic. You charge for this advice? Yes. How much? Camille named an hourly rate low enough to be insulting. That isn't enough. You trying to hire me? I'm trying not to take advantage. Then pay that for now and buy me lunch. If your store opens, we renegotiate. If? Camille looked toward the dented cooler. cold machinery and warm feelings. You don't have a store yet. A delivery driver named Noah helped load the cooler after the auction. He was lean, bearded, and younger than everyone else by at least 20 years. When Ruth gave him the market address, he looked up. My Uncle Owen lives across from there. Above the shoe shop, he told me somebody sold him peach preserves through a locked door. I wasn't open. He said that made it interesting. Noah delivered restaurant equipment and wholesale food for a regional supplier. He noticed Ruth's list of planned stock and named 2 distributors she had overlooked. When Camille questioned him about minimum orders, he answered without becoming defensive, which seemed to impress her. "You always work Saturdays?" Ruth asked. "Until I save enough to stop." "For what?" His expression closed by one careful degree. "Something of my own." Camille handed him the end of a tie-down strap. "Then stop talking and protect Ruth's something." The 3 of them wrestled the cooler into the front corner of the market. It was too wide for the space Ruth had chosen, so they shifted 2 shelves and discovered an electrical outlet Walter had covered with plywood. Pete arrived in time to claim he had known the outlet was there. By evening, the cooler stood against the wall, unplugged and solid. It was the first thing in the room that looked as if it expected food. Camille walked the small sales area again. "You need a name," she said. "Everybody thinks it already has one." "I asked what you think." Ruth glanced toward the storeroom, where the old sign leaned. "I don't know." Camille put on her coat. "Whose risk is it? Mine? Whose work? Mine, mostly. Then start there." The Dayton house received another offer the following Monday. It was below asking but above Ruth's private minimum. The buyer would honor Marcia's lease, wanted no repairs, and could close quickly. Ruth accepted. The financing moved from possible to conditional. Janice asked for an updated equipment budget. Dennis obtained the price of the fire door and subtracted nothing for sibling labor. Elaine found a point-of-sale system and mailed Ruth 43 printed pages because she did not trust links. Each step made the next one harder to dismiss. The 3 siblings signed their agreement in the credit union conference room. Dennis read every page. Elaine read half, and then watched Dennis read the rest. When it was done, the money from Ruth's house and loan paid for their shares. Elaine squeezed Ruth's shoulder before leaving. Dennis put his pen back in his pocket. "Dad would be glad it's staying Mercer's," he said. Ruth could have corrected him. Instead, she said, "Dad isn't buying it." That afternoon, she returned to the application on Janice's desk. The blank line waited beneath her crossed-out word. Ruthie wrote Ruth's Market. Her hand shook enough that the final T leaned to one side. Janice read it. "That your legal business name?" "Yes." "Certain?" Ruth thought of Walter's green sign, Tom's red door, and the senior apartment balcony where her family had already imagined her sitting. "Yes," she said again. Then she drove to the sign shop before Certainty had time to ask what it would cost. The sign maker placed 3 color samples on the counter. "Green would connect it to the old store," he said. Ruth looked at the darkest green. It was almost exactly Walter's shade, no green. He slid forward a red sample. No red either, blue. The blue reminded her of evening light on the Ohio River, deep enough to feel calm without becoming gloomy. She chose cream lettering because white looked too sharp. The sign maker wrote the dimensions on an order sheet. "S after Ruth?" "Yes." "You'd be surprised." "By apostrophes? By what people think their own names are?" He asked if she wanted Mercer in smaller letters underneath. Ruth almost said yes. It would have been diplomatic, and diplomacy cost nothing extra at that font size. "No," she said, "just Ruth's Market." She paid the deposit and left before he could offer another opportunity to retreat. The weeks that followed filled the market with noise. Electric drills whined in the front wall. The roofer discovered that the losing candidate beneath Walter's patch had run for county commissioner in 1996. Dennis installed the fire door himself, charging the price he had quoted but quietly including new trim at no cost. Ruth noticed. She did not thank him in a way that might embarrass him. The Dayton house closed on a Thursday. Marcia would remain through her lease, and Ruth turned over her final key to Lorna in the title company parking lot. For several miles afterward, Ruth's right hand kept reaching toward the empty pocket of her purse. She spent the afternoon pricing canned tomatoes. Camille worked beside her for 3 days before Ruth realized they had never formally agreed that Camille worked there. "You've put in 17 hours, Ruth said. 19. I only saw 17. That doesn't change time." Ruth wrote her a check at the auction rate. Camille examined it. This says consulting. That's what you said. I also told you we'd renegotiate if you opened. I haven't opened. You ordered milk. Spiritually, you're open. They stood near the new cooler while an electrician tested the outlet Walter had hidden. Ruth's budget could support part-time help if she cut the amount set aside for advertising. She had planned to manage the first month alone, with Pete or Owen helping unload stock as needed. Camille listened to the plan without interrupting. Then she said, "Absolutely not. I ran this place before. You helped run it 30 years ago, when your knees had cartilage and customers paid in cash. I can learn the register. Who watches it while you carry a grocery order upstairs? Who checks produce while you talk to somebody for 40 minutes because they knew your father? Who eats lunch? I eat lunch. Name yesterday's lunch." Ruth remembered coffee and half a broken cracker. Camille held out her hand. "Part-time. 3 days plus opening week. I manage food and purchasing when I'm here. You don't call me a clerk. What do I call you?" "Camille usually works." Ruth took her hand. The sign was scheduled for installation the Monday before opening. Ruth had not told Dennis. She had not told Elaine either, which bothered her more. She told herself there had been no good time. Dennis asked about contractors, prices, and delivery dates, but never the name. Elaine called every night for updates and somehow never asked. Ruth allowed the omission to survive because she knew the truth. If she announced the name, they would treat it as a family decision. The installer arrived at 9. His gray ponytail hung through the back of a faded ball cap, and his truck blocked half the street. He removed the paper wrapping while Ruth stood on the sidewalk. Seeing her name at full size unsettled her. On the bank form, the words had looked private. On the sign, they looked like a claim. "You sure that's what you ordered?" the installer asked. "Yes." People usually smile. "I'm working up to it." He had raised the sign halfway when Dennis's truck pulled up. By the time Dennis asked why she was doing this to them, the installer had stopped pretending not to listen. Across the street, 2 dryers turned behind the laundromat window, bright clothes lifting and falling like signal flags. Ruth lowered her hand from her eyes. "To you?" she asked. "To the family? I opened a business. You put yourself over Dad's name. It's my name, too. Then why isn't it on the sign?" She had no quick answer because he was right in a way he did not intend. Mercer was her name. She had been born with it, left it unchanged when she married Tom, and carried it into every room where somebody introduced her first as Walter's daughter, then Tom's wife, then the sister who stayed. "It's on the tax bill," she said. Dennis stared at her. "That's your answer?" "No. My answer is that the store is mine. Dad built this, and I'm rebuilding it. You think changing the name makes that true?" The sign settled against the brackets with a metal knock. The installer called down to ask Ruth if the height looked right. "It's fine," she said. Dennis stepped between her and the ladder. "Elaine, no?" Ruth hesitated. His laugh held no humor. "Of course she doesn't. She'll know today. You waited until it was on the wall. I paid for it. I chose it. You could have shown a little respect. For Dad, for all of us." A delivery van turned onto the block and waited behind Dennis's open truck door. The driver tapped the horn. Dennis slammed the door without moving the truck. Ruth could have told him about the years behind Walter's counter, the orders she corrected, the customers she remembered after he forgot, the Saturdays he thanked her by asking why she had not swept beneath the bread rack. Dennis knew those facts. He simply arranged them under Walter's name. "I am not reopening his store," she said. "I'm opening mine." His face tightened. "Using his building, my building, with his customers. We'll find out. With the family's reputation. That reputation includes me. Not anymore, apparently." The cruelty of it surprised them both. Dennis looked away first, toward the new sign. The deep blue reflected weakly in his truck window. "I hope it's worth it," he said. He drove off before the installer finished tightening the last bolt. Elaine called 11 minutes later. "You named it Ruth's. Not hello, not congratulations." "Yes. Dennis sent me a picture. I was going to call." "When?" "After the sign was up." So, it couldn't be changed. Ruth went inside. Camille stood at the counter applying price labels to jars with unnecessary concentration. "It wasn't up for a vote," Ruth said. "I didn't ask for a vote. You would have had an opinion. I have an opinion about your shoes. You still wear them. What's your opinion about the name?" There was a pause. "I think it suits you," Elaine said. "I also think you should have told me." The answer left Ruth nowhere comfortable to stand. I'm sorry. Are you? Yes, I can support something and still be hurt by how you did it. Ruth leaned against the counter. I knew Dennis would fight. I'm not Dennis. I know. Do you? Camille moved to the shelves with her labels, giving Ruth privacy without leaving. I'm learning, Ruth said. Elaine exhaled. Paul likes the blue. That's something. He said Dad's sign looked like a state park restroom. Ruth laughed despite herself. Elaine did too, briefly. Then Elaine said, I won't be there opening day. Ruth's laughter stopped. Because of the name? Because I have a cardiology appointment. You see a cardiologist? Routine tests, I told you last week. Ruth searched her memory and found only fragments from that call. Elaine describing parking at the clinic while Ruth had been comparing invoices. I forgot. I know. The two words were not sharp. They did not need to be. Call me afterward, Ruth said. I will. Even if I'm busy, you will be busy. Call anyway. After they hung up, Ruth stood staring at the phone. Camille placed another label on a jar. You want me to say you did the right thing? Not especially. Good. Right things can still be done badly. You and my sister would get along. I get along with everybody once they admit I'm right. Outside, the installer removed his ladder. The sign stayed where Ruth had put it. The first grocery delivery arrived Wednesday. Noah backed the truck toward the rear door and climbed out carrying a clipboard. He was employed by the distributor, but he treated Ruth's order as if it belonged to him. You bought too many canned beans, he said. They keep. So do bricks. People don't eat enough of either to build a business. Camille made the order. Noah looked past Ruth. Camille! Camille appeared in the doorway. She added 2 cases after I left. They were discounted, Ruth said. Now we can lose money in volume, Camille replied. Noah laughed. He unloaded flour, rice, canned goods, paper products, and the first small dairy order. When a box split near the rear entrance, he crouched to gather jars before Ruth could bend. You always deliver this route? She asked. Thursdays, usually. I switched with somebody. Why? My uncle said you might need help. Owen could have asked. He did. He asked me. Noah stayed after his scheduled delivery to level the cooler and show Ruth how to check the compressor temperature. Camille asked how he knew so much about kitchen equipment. I had a restaurant, he said. Had? Had. Camille waited. My partner and I disagreed about money. Meaning? Meaning, there's no restaurant. His voice ended the inquiry. Camille, surprisingly, led it. On Friday night, Ruth and Camille stocked the last shelf at 11:40. The produce display held apples, potatoes, onions, cabbage, carrots, oranges, and one carefully chosen lettuce. The cooler hummed. The old counter had a new register on it, though Walter's knife marks remained visible beneath. Camille tied an apron around her waist. You're underpriced on the preserves. People won't pay more. Then people can make their own. Ruth raised each jar by 50 cents. After Camille left, Ruth switched off the aisle lights one row at a time. Through the front windows, her name floated backward against the dark glass. She went upstairs, but did not sleep. At 5:30, she came down and brewed coffee in a machine Noah had found at the distributor's warehouse. At 6:58, she unlocked the front door. Mrs. Bell waited outside in her purple raincoat. You're early, Ruth said. You're late. It's 2 minutes before 7. I've been here 6. Mrs. Bell stepped inside, studied the blue sign through the window, and sniffed. Your father wouldn't have liked that. I know. He didn't like much. I know that too. Mrs. Bell took a basket from the stack and walked toward the eggs as if the store had never closed. Ruth remained at the open door. The street was damp and quiet. No crowd waited. No music played. The register drawer held $100 in change, and the loan payment was due in 26 days. Camille came up behind her and placed a warm paper cup in her hand. Coffee, she said, then panic. Ruth took a sip. Across the street, Owen raised his hand from the shoe shop doorway. A woman leaving the laundromat noticed the open door and changed direction. Ruth turned the sign from closed to open. The woman from the laundromat bought coffee, 2 oranges, and a roll of paper towels. Ruth rang the paper towels twice. Don't worry, the woman said. I'll only take 1. I know how a register works. Camille reached around Ruth and removed the extra item. She's emotionally familiar with registers. Technically, they're still getting acquainted. The woman smiled. I'm Val. I own the laundromat. Ruth, I know. Of course she did. Val paid, then stayed near the counter drinking her coffee. Mrs. Belle returned from the dairy cooler with eggs, butter, and a loaf of white bread. You got white this time, she said. I learn. You charge too much for it. I learn selectively. By 8, the store held 6 customers. By 9, it held none. Ruth straightened cans that were already straight. Camille sliced a cabbage in half, wrapped each piece, and placed both beside the whole heads. Somebody living alone doesn't need 3 pounds of cabbage, she said. I thought we were waiting to see what sells. We're helping it decide. At 9:30, Pete arrived wearing a clean shirt and behaving as if he had never seen the store before. He examined the produce, opened the cooler, and squinted at prices. You going to buy something? Camille asked. I'm evaluating. Evaluate with money. Pete bought a pound of coffee and complained that Walter had stocked a better brand. Walter's coffee could remove paint, Ruth said. That's how you knew it was fresh. He paid with a $50 bill, which emptied most of Ruth's change drawer. After he left, Camille said, he did that on purpose. He likes to feel prosperous. He bought $8 coffee with a 50. He feels like a railway baron. The morning became busier in uneven waves. Former customers came to look at the old counter and tell Ruth where Walter had kept the canned peaches. Neighbors who had never entered Mercer's Market asked whether she carried oat milk, lottery tickets, wine, organic soap, phone chargers, and a particular brand of hot sauce whose name Ruth could not catch even after it was repeated 3 times. She wrote requests in a notebook beneath the register. At 11, a man put his hand on the counter and said, Your daddy used to let me pay Fridays. Did you pay him Fridays? Mostly. What day did you miss? He laughed, then stopped when Ruth did not. He paid cash. The first person to ask about the sign was a woman named Marlene, who had gone to church with Walter. Marlene touched Ruth's wrist and lowered her voice. Was the old name not available? It was available. Oh. Marlene looked up through the front window at the blue letters. I suppose you wanted a fresh start. I wanted my name. Mercer is your name, so people keep telling me. Marlene bought nothing, though she stayed 12 minutes. Dennis came shortly before noon. Ruth saw him through the window and braced herself, but he entered carrying a toolbox. The trim on the fire door shifted, he said. It closes. It rubs. I didn't notice. That doesn't mean it doesn't rub. He walked through the store without looking at the sign or greeting Camille. Near the produce display, he stopped. You've got soft apples. Discount basket, Camille said. Soft apples make the good apples look soft. Then don't stare at them. He continued to the rear. Ruth followed him. You didn't have to come today. I said I'd fix the trim. You could have come yesterday. I had work. The market sounded busier from the rear hallway than it looked from the front. Voices bounced off the old tin ceiling. The register drawer snapped shut. For a moment, Ruth saw Dennis listening. More people than you expected? She asked. It's opening day. What does that mean? People come to see what changed. You came. I came to fix the door. The door had a bright scraped line along one edge where the trim rubbed. Dennis removed the offending piece and shaved it with a hand plane. After several minutes, he said, Susan likes the sign. Ruth leaned against the wall. Do you? No. Thank you for answering. It's well made. That wasn't the question. It's not changing, so why argue? You started the argument on the sidewalk. He worked in silence. You made it clear it wasn't family business. The words hurt more because he kept his eyes on the wood. It can still matter to the family without belonging to the family. That sounds like something Elaine would put on a pillow. You could come to dinner upstairs. I'm busy. Tonight? I said I'm busy. He replaced the trim, tested the door 3 times, and packed his tools. At the counter, he set down a can of beans. 1 can? Ruth asked. I don't need beans. Then why are you buying them? To support local business, Camille rang him up. You could support it twice. We have plenty. Dennis looked at Ruth. She laughed before she meant to, and after a second, he bought 2. The first day's sales exceeded Ruth's projection by $84. The second day missed it by $112. By the 5th day, curiosity had thinned. The old customers came back, but most bought a few necessities. Ruth had imagined full baskets. What she saw were eggs, a can of soup, half a cabbage, coffee, 1 onion. Small purchases required the same lights, refrigeration, and labor as large ones. Camille came in on Monday carrying a slow cooker from her house. She combined 2 soft onions, bruised carrots, a cabbage half, and discounted stew meat into soup. At lunch, Val from the laundromat bought a bowl. Owen bought 2. Pete announced that it needed salt, then finished his. "We're not licensed for a restaurant," Ruth said. "We're licensed for prepared takeaway," Camille replied. "You have the certificate." I checked. "You checked without asking me?" I asked Janice. "The loan officer? She eats at my church. You discuss my business at church? Only with God and people who can help." By closing, they had sold all but 1 serving. Camille packed the last serving into a container and handed it to Ruth. "You charge yourself?" "I bought the ingredients. The business bought the ingredients. Then the business can buy me dinner." Camille wrote the meal in a waste log. Ruth disliked the log immediately. It showed every apple, yogurt cup, loaf, and cracked egg that had failed to become money. Camille refused to let her take aging food upstairs without recording it. "You can eat the losses," Camille said. "You can't pretend you didn't have them." Noah's Thursday delivery included more customer requests and fewer beans. He arrived near closing and found Ruth on the phone, writing down an order for Mrs. Bell. "You doing phone orders already?" he asked. "She wants 6 things. How's she getting them?" "Owen's taking them on his way home. That'll work until Owen decides he's a logistics company." Noah showed her a basic online ordering service he had used at his restaurant. The monthly fee made Ruth frown. "Phone's free," she said. "Your time isn't? Everybody keeps saying that." "Maybe repetition helps." That's what Janice said. Noah leaned against the counter. "She turned down my restaurant loan." Ruth looked up. "Probably saved me money," he added. "What happened with the restaurant?" "Same thing that happens to a lot of restaurants. We had more confidence than cash. You said you and your partner disagreed. We disagreed about whose fault it was. There was no self-pity in the answer. There was also no invitation to go further. Noah helped her create a paper order form that could be read over the phone without wandering through the aisles. He listed delivery windows twice a week, then crossed them out when Ruth said she had no driver. "I could do Tuesday evenings," he said. "You already have a job. And debt. I can't hire another person. Pay per delivery. That won't be enough. It's more than not doing it." Camille, counting the register nearby, said, "Take yes," before he remembers dignity. They agreed to try 6 deliveries the following Tuesday. Elaine called after her cardiology tests. Ruth answered on the second ring. "What did they say?" Elaine paused. "You remembered. I forgot first." Then I remembered very thoroughly. The tests were fine. They want me to walk more and eat less butter, so naturally Paul took me for biscuits. Ruth told her about the first week. She did not improve the numbers in the telling. Elaine listened, then said she could come the next Friday to learn the register. "You don't have to." "I know. Are you still angry?" "Yes." "Can you be angry and work the register?" "I've done more complicated things." Friday brought a notice from the utility company showing Ruth's first commercial electric charge. The amount was higher than Dennis's corrected estimate. Ruth read it 3 times. She reduced the next produce order, then increased it when the distributor offered peaches at a price that made profit seem easy. Camille saw the invoice Monday morning. "How many cases?" 8. "You sold 14 pounds of peaches last week. These are cheaper. Rotten peaches are always cheap. They aren't rotten. They own watches." Ruth arranged them near the entrance in wooden crates. The color warmed the whole store. Customers admired them. Several picked one up, squeezed it, and put it back. By Wednesday, the ripe smell reached the counter. Ruth marked them down. She offered samples. She put a peaches today sign in the window. Val bought 4. Pete bought 2 and accused her of choosing them for him because they were soft. At closing, 6 crates remained. Camille stood over them with both hands on her hips. Waste log. "I can save them. Not all of them. I made preserves for years. 6 crates. I have sugar. You have a loan payment. That's why I'm not throwing away inventory." Camille's face softened in a way Ruth disliked more than disapproval. "Going bad isn't a moral failure. It is if I ordered it. It's a business mistake. Write it down and don't repeat it." Ruth carried the first crate upstairs. At midnight, the kitchen windows steamed. Peach skins filled the sink, jars crowded the counter, and syrup had dried sticky beneath Ruth's shoes. Her back hurt in the place she had strained moving the shelf. At 2, She opened the fifth crate. 3 peaches collapsed beneath her fingers. She threw those away and felt furious with them. When Camille arrived at 6:30, she found Ruth downstairs arranging 28 jars of preserves beside the register. Ruth's hair was damp at the temples. A yellow stain marked her blouse. Camille picked up a jar and read the handwritten price. This doesn't include 6 hours of labor. Nobody pays 6 hours for preserves. Then you don't make 6 hours of preserves. I save most of them. Camille looked at Ruth's shaking hand as she reached for another label. No, she said. You moved the loss from the trash can into your body. Ruth took the jar from her and set it on the shelf. Open the door, she said. People will be here. For the next hour, only Mrs. Bell came. She bought eggs and complained that the market smelled too sweet. Camille turned the door sign back to closed. Ruth stared at it. What are you doing? Preventing you from confusing exhaustion with customer service. You don't close a store because the owner is tired. You do if the owner just put a $19 sale in the register as $1,900. I corrected it. After Mrs. Bell asked whether she'd bought the building, Ruth reached for the sign. Camille planted herself in front of the door. You hired me to manage when I'm here. I hired you part-time. Good. For the next 30 minutes, I'm managing you part-time. Go upstairs, change your blouse, eat something that isn't a peach, and sit down. I have work, so do I. You're making mine harder. Ruth felt the childish urge to remain simply because she had been told to leave. Camille waited without raising her voice. 30 minutes, Ruth said. 45, 35, go. Upstairs, the kitchen looked as though a fruit truck had overturned in it. Ruth stepped out of her sticky shoes and left them by the door. She ate 2 slices of cheese over the sink, then sat in Walter's blue chair. She woke to the telephone ringing. For one confused second, she thought Walter was calling from his bedroom. Her neck hurt, her feet were bare, and sunlight had shifted across the floor. Elaine was on the phone. You sound awful, she said. Thank you. You were asleep. No. Ruth. I was resting with poor posture. You're supposed to train me on the register today. Ruth looked at the clock. She had been upstairs for an hour and 20 minutes. Come after lunch. I'm already outside. Downstairs, Elaine stood at the counter wearing a blouse too nice for grocery work. Camille had pinned a paper tag to it that read, Trainee in thick black marker. I did not approve this, Elaine said. It's removable, Camille replied. I mean the handwriting. Ruth reached for the tag. Elaine slapped her hand away. If I have to suffer, people should know I'm new. Training Elaine improved Ruth's mood because Elaine was terrible at the register. She scanned a jar 4 times, forgot to weigh onions, and asked a customer whether cash back meant the store returned part of the purchase price. Ruth laughed so hard she had to grip the counter. You said you understood paying, Dennis said from behind them. No one had seen him enter. Elaine turned. I understand it from the other side. Apparently that's a border crossing. He wore his work clothes and carried no toolbox. He selected coffee, bread, and a jar of peach preserves. Ruth watched him read the price. You raised it, he said. Camille did. I prevented ongoing theft, Camille said from the produce display. Dennis put the jar in his basket. When Elaine tried to ring him up, the register refused her twice. Dennis stood patiently, which made her more flustered. Finally, Ruth reached around and pressed the correct key. I had it, Elaine said. You had him buying 12 pounds of onions. I might want onions, Dennis said. You don't cook, Elaine replied. Susan cooks. I transport. He paid and left, with the preserves tucked under his arm. Elaine watched him through the window. He didn't complain about the sign. He's moved on to silent disapproval. No, that looks different. His eyebrows go lower. By 3, Elaine could manage ordinary sales without assistance. She learned customer names quickly and asked questions Ruth would not have thought to ask. When Val mentioned the laundromat vending machine had broken, Elaine suggested small packets of detergent and stain remover near the market register. Val offered to direct customers across the street. That's a good idea, Ruth admitted. Elaine looked offended. Try not to sound shocked. They ate soup at the counter during a quiet stretch. Elaine studied the store from Walter's old stool. I see it now, she said. What? Why you stayed? I didn't stay for the market. It was closed. I don't mean the building. Ruth waited. People come in and need little things, not just groceries. They need you to remember what they said last time. That isn't why I stayed with Dad. No, but it's why you could. Ruth turned her spoon in the soup. You make me sound needy. I make you sound needed. There's a difference, is there? Elaine considered that. Probably not as much as I thought. Before leaving, she bought 2 jars of preserves, detergent she did not need, and the last half cabbage. This is pity shopping, Ruth said. I like cabbage. You once said cabbage tasted like a wet envelope. People change. Not that much. Elaine paid full price. Then consider it an apology for River Glen. You don't owe me one, I know. That's why I can afford it. The detergent packets sold faster than Ruth expected. Phone orders grew from 6 to 11. Noah delivered them on Tuesday evenings, using his own car after finishing his route. He refused to let Ruth pay for gasoline separately, because he said that was what the delivery fee covered. The first Tuesday, he returned with 3 empty crates, cash in envelopes, and a complaint from Mrs. Bell. She says the bananas were too green. She picked them over the phone. She also says I drove too fast. She was inside her house. I asked how she knew. She said my face looked speedy. Camille began making soup twice a week. Ruth added half-size meatloaves from a local bakery kitchen that rented production time to small food businesses. They sold slowly until Noah suggested packaging them with mashed potatoes and green beans as a complete supper. People don't want ingredients after 6, he said. They want the day to be over. Camille looked at him. That's almost intelligent. I owned a restaurant, and how'd that go? Long enough to learn things. The first 12 suppers sold out. The next 18 left 4 behind, which Camille recorded as waste, and Ruth took upstairs only after paying the store. More customers began coming between 5 and 6. The market's shorter hours stretched. Ruth stayed open 15 minutes late, then 30. She arrived earlier to portion food before Camille came in. Sales rose, though not enough to erase the first weeks. Ruth paid the first loan installment from the business account and stared at the remaining balance until it seemed irresponsible to feel proud. The next morning, a sales representative from a regional food distributor arrived without an appointment. His name was Cal Hammond, and he had supplied Walter's store during its last years. Dennis said you might want to revive the old account, he told Ruth. Dennis? Saw him at the builder's supply. He said you were testing things under a new name, but Mercer's might be back down the road. Ruth's hand tightened around the price sheet. What exactly did he say? Cal's confidence faded. Nothing bad. Did he say this business was changing its name? He said you were trying an idea. What idea? Cal looked toward the sign visible through the window. Ruth's. Camille stopped arranging apples. Ruth set down the price sheet. The business is Ruth's Market. It will remain Ruth's Market. Dennis Mercer has no role here. Cal raised both palms. That's fine. I came because the old account had a good payment history. Dad's account? Yes. I'm not Dad. I can see that. Ruth heard how harshly she was speaking and could not stop. Then quote me based on my orders, not his history, and not whatever my brother thinks happens when I fail. Cal packed his papers more quickly than he had unfolded them. After he left, Camille said, he had decent dairy prices. There are other distributors. Also with decent dairy prices, I'll find out. You could call him back without marrying him. Ruth picked up the phone and called Dennis instead. He answered over the sound of machinery. What? Stop discussing my business with suppliers. A pause. The machinery receded. Cal found you? You sent him. I told him you might need another source. You told him Mercer's might come back. I said if the store changed hands again, the family name would still have value. If I fail? I didn't say that. What other change of hands are you expecting? Dennis exhaled. He offered Dad good terms. Then you should have told me his name. You should not have told him my business was an experiment. It is an experiment. No, it's my livelihood. That doesn't make it less risky. Are you warning people away from me? Jesus, Ruth. I was trying to help. You were keeping a foot in the door. I don't want the store. You want its failure to prove you were right. The machinery behind him stopped. The silence that followed made her wish she had chosen different words, not because they were entirely false, but because she had aimed them to hurt. Dennis's voice lowered. You think everything I do is about you now. I think you're telling people my name is temporary. I think you sold your house and borrowed money because Dad died, and nobody's allowed to say you might regret it. Stay out of my business, gladly. He ended the call. Ruth put the receiver down. Camille was trimming wilted leaves from a head of lettuce. Feel better? No. Good fight? No. Then call Cal. I'm not using Dad's account. Don't. Open your own. But you need dairy prices, not a purity ceremony. Ruth hated that Camille was right, while Ruth was still angry. She called Cal and apologized for her tone. She did not apologize for the name. He returned that afternoon with new account paperwork and prices lower than her current suppliers on milk, butter, and eggs. Ruth signed for a 30-day trial. Dennis did not answer her evening call. He did not come into the market for 9 days. Susan came on the 4th and bought coffee. She stood at the counter turning the bag over in her hands. He shouldn't have talked to Cal, she said. Did he tell you? He complained that he'd tried to save you money, and you accused him of planning your funeral. I didn't use those words. He improves dialogue when he retells it. Ruth slid Susan's receipt across the counter. How bad is the flooring business? Susan looked toward Camille, who took the hint and moved into the back. Worse than he said. Better than he thinks at 3 in the morning. Can I help? Not with money. I wasn't offering money. Good. What then? Susan tucked the coffee against her side. Let him be useful without letting him be in charge. He doesn't know the difference yet. Neither do I, apparently. Susan smiled sadly. That might be a family business. Friday evening brought a hard rain. Water drummed against the awning and drove people in from the laundromat and bus stop. The market filled near closing. Camille heated soup. Noah finished early with his route, carried phone orders to waiting cars. Elaine had mailed a handwritten sign advertising complete suppers, and Val taped one inside the laundromat. Ruth moved from register to cooler to counter, answering questions, finding change, remembering who wanted low-salt soup and who could not open tight jar lids. The room felt warm and close. Wet coats steamed. Someone laughed at Pete for buying the last meatloaf after claiming he disliked it. At 6:20, Ruth realized every supper was gone. At 6:30, the soup pot was empty. When the final customer left, the register total was the highest since opening day. Camille sat on a crate and removed one shoe. Don't get excited. Rain is not a business model. I'm not excited. You're smiling at the register tape. Ruth folded the tape and placed it in the drawer. Noah stood by the old counter, looking into the dark rear section. You've got room back there for a real kitchen. I've got room back there for a great deal of expensive work. I could rent it? Ruth looked at him. He kept his tone casual, but his fingers pressed flat against the scarred wood. I know equipment, he said. I know production. You need prepared food, and I need something that's mine without needing a whole restaurant. Camille put her shoe back on. Ruth saw the possibility immediately, which frightened her more than if it had sounded foolish. No, she said. Noah's hand lifted from the counter. I can't take on another idea, Ruth added. Not now? He nodded once. Fair enough. Outside, rain ran down the window beneath her name. Behind her, the empty soup pot clicked as it cooled. Noah did not mention the kitchen again. He continued his Thursday deliveries and the Tuesday phone route, but the easy extra conversation disappeared. He brought crates in, collected signatures, and left. When Ruth asked how his uncle was, he said Owen was fine. When Camille asked what he would cook if he had the space, he said it did not matter. Ruth told herself she had been sensible. The rear section needed wiring, plumbing, ventilation, and equipment. Noah had debt, a failed partnership, and no written proposal. A promising idea could still be a bad idea. She also noticed that he no longer stayed for coffee. The Friday suppers kept selling. Camille added chicken with noodles, then roast pork with sweet potatoes. She portioned everything for 1 or 2 people, refusing Ruth's suggestion that a larger package offered better value. Value to whom? Camille asked. Somebody who wants pork until Wednesday? Families might buy it. Families have supermarkets, drive-thrus, and enthusiasm. We're feeding people who are tired. The half portions drew customers from farther away. A retired accountant named Gloria began calling every Thursday to reserve 2 suppers and a pint of soup. A widower from the next block bought 1 meatloaf for himself and another for his freezer, though he insisted the second was for company. Val sent laundromat customers over for coffee. Phone orders reached 20 in 1 week. Ruth added an extra hour in the evening. Camille objected. You don't have the staff. We have customers. We have a rush. That is not the same thing. We can't lock the door while people are coming. We can if the hours are printed on it. Ruth stayed open anyway. The market began changing in small, useful ways. Elaine's detergent packets occupied a basket by the register. Noah's order forms hung on a clipboard beside the phone. Camille moved the discounted produce away from the fresh display and called it tonight's soup, which made the same soft apples look intentional. Pete complained there was nowhere to sit. "It's a grocery store," Ruth said. "It's got coffee. You can take coffee with you. I've spent 70 years taking things with me. I'd like to put something down." 2 days later, Dennis appeared with a tape measure. He did not refer to their argument. He walked around the old counter, measured its depth, and crouched to inspect the base. "What are you doing?" Ruth asked. "Pete called me. Pete should stop managing my furniture. He says people need a table. People need to buy groceries. People who sit drink more coffee. Is that a professional flooring opinion? It's common sense." The counter had an 8-foot butcher block section Walter once used for wrapping large orders. The wood was scarred but sound. Dennis proposed cutting it free, sanding it, and setting it on sturdy legs in the open space near the front windows. The register could remain on the shorter section. Ruth hesitated. Dad would hate that. Yes. The speed of Dennis's answer made her smile. He worked after closing for 3 nights. Ruth held boards while he cut, though he told her twice to move her fingers. Elaine drove up on the 3rd evening and applied oil to the sanded wood. Camille brought food. Susan arrived with Dennis's forgotten knee pads and stayed to eat. For the first time since the funeral, all of them occupied the market without negotiating what it meant. When the table was finished, Pete ran his palm over the wood. "Too smooth," he said. Dennis pulled out a chair. "Sit somewhere else." Pete sat. The table changed the room. People drank coffee there in the morning. Gloria ate soup beside Val and learned that they had once worked in neighboring office buildings. Owen spread the newspaper across half the surface until Camille limited him to 2 sections. Customers who lived alone lingered without having to announce loneliness as their reason. Ruth liked the table best after closing, when cups and crumbs showed where people had been. She liked the sales totals too. They remained modest, but the numbers moved upward for 4 straight weeks. Ruth paid the second loan installment, the utility bill, Camille's wages, and Noah's delivery fees without moving money from her personal account. Instead of relief, success gave her new things to fear. More customers meant more stock. More stock meant more spoilage, more cash sitting on shelves, and more chances to miscalculate. Ruth began checking Camille's orders after Camille left, reducing one item and increasing another. She moved prices down when customers complained, then moved them back up after Camille discovered it. "You hired me to manage food," Camille said. "I own the store. Both statements can be true. I'm responsible for the bills, and I'm responsible for selling food at a profit." Ruth had no answer that did not sound like Walter, so she ended the conversation by carrying a box into the back. She started arriving at 5. She stayed after 8. On Sundays, when the market was closed, she cleaned shelves and compared invoices. Her right knee swelled. The strain in her back became a constant hot line. Elaine began calling the store rather than the apartment because Ruth rarely went upstairs before bedtime. "You need a day off," she said. "I'm closed Sundays. You work Sundays. I don't deal with customers. That isn't what off means. Did Camille call you?" "No. Should she?" Ruth changed the subject. Noah brought a written proposal for the rear kitchen. It was 3 pages, with rent, utility costs, shared equipment, insurance, and a schedule that kept his food production separate from the market's retail operations. He had found used equipment and spoken with the county about the required work. "You said you needed something written," he told Ruth. "I said I couldn't take on another idea. You also said not now. It's still now." He stood across the counter while she skimmed the pages. The proposal was careful. Noah would pay for some equipment himself and use his wholesale contacts to source the rest. His rent would help cover the improvements. Camille believed prepared meals could become the market's strongest category. Ruth saw all of that. She also saw disruption, inspection delays, utility increases, and another person whose decisions would affect a building she had risked everything to own. "You're depending on sales through the store," she said, "at first. What if they aren't enough? I keep my delivery job. Then when do you cook? Early mornings and weekends. You'll burn out." Noah's expression shifted. "You work 80 hours. It's my business. That's why I'm trying to build mine." The answer struck too close. "I said no. You barely read it. I don't need 3 pages to know the answer." Camille, portioning soup nearby, set down her ladle. It's a good proposal. Ruth looked at her. Did you help him? I checked his food costs. Without asking me. He didn't ask you to pay me. I pay you to work here. And my brain stays mine after 6. Noah took the proposal from the counter. Forget it. I'm trying to protect the store. From rent and food people want. From someone who already lost one restaurant. The moment the words left her, Ruth wanted them back. Noah folded the proposal once, then again. That wasn't the proposal's fault. He left by the rear door. Camille watched it close. You're scared. I'm cautious. You're punishing him for bringing you something you want. You don't know what I want. Nobody does, if you keep changing it every time it requires trust. Ruth turned away. We open in 10 minutes. The next Friday, the market filled before 5. Rain had nothing to do with it. 40 suppers had been reserved by phone, and walk-in customers wanted more. Camille had increased the order without telling Ruth. You ordered 60? Ruth asked, staring at the invoice. I ordered ingredients for 60. We agreed on 48. We had 40 reservations by Wednesday. And if the others don't sell, they will. That's what I said about peaches. This isn't peaches. The cooler was crowded with containers. 2 customers waited at the counter. Val stood by the table holding a supper and chatting with Elaine, who had come to help at the register. Dennis was repairing a loose chair leg near the window. Camille reached for the invoice. We can argue after the rush. Ruth pulled it back. You don't get to make decisions with my money and tell me afterward. I make purchasing decisions every week, within the budget. This is within the budget. No, it isn't. It is if we sell them. That isn't a budget. That's hope. Camille's eyes narrowed. You should know. The remark cut. Ruth felt heat rise into her face. A customer approached with a container. Excuse me, is this the low-sodium one? Camille answered. The blue labels are low sodium, Ruth said. Those labels look green. They're blue. They look green under these lights. The customer held the container between them, uncertain. Camille took it gently. This is low sodium. I made it. Ruth reached for another. A tight ache passed behind her breastbone. She had felt it twice that week while carrying boxes, and both times it faded when she stopped. She did not stop now. We should mark them again, she said. After the rush. We'll do it now. Camille set down the container. Ruth, go sit for 5 minutes. The words spoken in front of customers felt like a hand against her chest. I'm fine. You're gray. I said I'm fine. Elaine left the register. Maybe you should sit. I do not need everybody managing me. No one spoke. The customer still held her supper. Ruth turned on Camille. You're here to help me, not take over my store. Camille became very still. I am not your help, she said. That isn't what I meant. It's exactly the word you chose. Camille, we are busy. Yes. Can we discuss this later? Camille untied her apron. She folded it once and placed it on the communal table. No, she said. You can discuss it with your help. She walked into the back for her coat. Ruth followed. You're leaving during a rush? You just told me who I am here. I was angry. So was Walter, probably. Ruth stopped. Camille put on her coat. Her hands shook, but her voice did not. I spent 21 years being called family by men who cut my pay and help, by women who used my work. I told you when I came here, I manage food. I don't stand behind you and make your courage look solitary. I know what you do. You knew. Camille walked out through the rear door. When Ruth returned to the sales floor, every person tried not to look at her. Dennis had taken Camille's place by the cooler. Elaine stood at the register. The ache behind Ruth's breastbone tightened again. All 60 suppers sold. Ruth had never felt less successful. Dennis reached her before she reached the stool. One moment Ruth was standing beside the register, insisting the tightness would pass. The next, his hand was under her elbow, and Elaine was taking off Ruth's apron. I don't need both of you, Ruth said. You're getting both, Elaine replied. It's indigestion. Dennis looked at her. From what? You haven't eaten. I had soup. When? Ruth could not remember. Val offered to lock the laundromat and drive them. Pete offered to watch the market. Everybody began offering at once, turning Ruth's body into the center of a meeting she had not scheduled. No ambulance, she said. Fine, Elaine answered. My car. I need to close out the register. I can close it, Dennis said. You don't know the system, then Elaine can. Elaine had finally learned the system. Ruth resented her competence for exactly 3 seconds. The emergency department kept Ruth for 4 hours. They took blood, attached wires, asked questions, and repeated some of the tests after an interval that seemed designed to punish impatience. Dennis sat beneath a television showing a home renovation program with no sound. Elaine brought Ruth water, then took it away when a nurse said she had to wait. The pain faded before the first hour ended. When the clinician said they had found no sign of a heart attack, Ruth felt relief followed immediately by embarrassment. "So, I can leave," she said. "You can leave with instructions to follow up with your doctor." What caused it? There are several possibilities: muscle strain, reflux, stress. Today's testing rules out some emergencies. It doesn't give you permission to ignore the next episode. Ruth nodded with the solemnity of someone who had every intention of negotiating privately with the next episode. The clinician looked at Elaine. "Make sure she understands that." "I do," Ruth said. Elaine said, "She doesn't." In the parking lot, Dennis held open the rear door of Elaine's car. "I'm not sitting in back. You're not driving. I can sit in front." "Paul has sheet music on the seat," Elaine said. "Move it. It's an arrangement for 9 brass instruments. It deserves respect." Ruth got in the back. They stopped at the market before taking her upstairs. Pete had locked the door. The suppers were gone, the register had been closed correctly, and someone had wiped the counter. Camille's folded apron remained on the communal table. Ruth picked it up. Dennis stood near the door. "She was good. She is good." "You shouldn't have said that." "I know." Elaine gathered Ruth's purse and coat. "Not tonight. If nobody says it tonight, she'll spend the night inventing a version where she was right." "I know I was wrong." Dennis looked at her. "Do you?" She folded the apron again. "I called her help." "You made her help," he said. "There's a difference." The sentence struck with the force of recognition. Walter had never denied Ruth worked. He had praised her constantly to customers. "My Ruthie can handle anything. My girl keeps me straight. I don't know what I'd do without her." Every compliment had made her indispensable and kept him central. Her labor existed as evidence of his importance. Ruth sat at the table. "I did what Dad did." Elaine placed her purse down. "You did one thing Dad did." "I changed her orders. You changed everybody's decisions. I was protecting the store." Dennis pulled out a chair. "Dad always had a reason, too." Ruth looked at him. "You're enjoying this?" "No." He lowered himself into the chair. "I'm enjoying not being the only one who sounds like him." Elaine sat opposite them. The 3 siblings remained in the darkened market, surrounded by the results of work none of them had imagined 7 weeks earlier. "Why didn't you say something?" Ruth asked. Elaine made a small, incredulous sound. "I told you to take a day off. I thought you meant I was old. I meant you were unbearable." Dennis nodded. "You were. You barely came in. Because every time I did, you watched my hands like I might steal a shelf. You discussed my business with Cal. That was wrong." The admission came without defense. Ruth looked up. Dennis rubbed his thumb across a knife mark in the table. "I wanted the old account to matter. Dad paid it on time through 3 recessions. I thought if Cal gave you better terms, then some part of what Dad built was helping. You told him Mercer's might come back. I wanted that too." "Why?" He looked around the store. "Because Ruth's market doesn't include me." The honesty silenced them. Dennis gave a short laugh. "Stupid, isn't it? I wanted to sell the building. I told everybody Dad's store was dead. Then you made it alive, and suddenly I wanted my name on it. It's still your name, not up there." Ruth thought of her own answer on the sidewalk. The sign did not erase the family, but perhaps she had used secrecy to make it feel like a punishment before it became a declaration. "You built the table," she said. "I charged you. You didn't charge enough. Don't tell Susan." Elaine leaned both forearms on the table. "Can we finish having breakthroughs after Ruth eats?" Upstairs, Elaine made toast. Dennis found Walter's old antacid tablets, checked the expiration date, and threw them away with visible regret. Ruth called Camille. The call went to voicemail. "This is Ruth. I'm home. The pain wasn't a heart attack, but they told me to see my doctor. I'm sorry, not for being angry. I was allowed to be angry. I'm sorry I used my anger to reduce you. You manage the food. You helped build the business. I knew that, and when I felt out of control, I pretended I was the only person whose work counted." She stopped. Dennis and Elaine were trying not to listen from 6 feet away. "I'll pay everything I owe you whether you come back or not. I won't ask tonight." "I'm sorry." She ended the call. Camille did not answer that night. In the morning, Ruth dressed for work. She made it to the bottom of the stairs before she saw the apron where she had left it. The cooler hummed. The shelves needed facing. Saturday was their best morning, and 21 phone orders were due by noon. Ruth turned on one bank of lights. Then she turned it off. On a sheet of paper, she wrote, "Closed Saturday, Monday, and Tuesday. Reopening Wednesday." She stared at the words. 3 missed business days meant lost sales, spoiled produce, disappointed customers, and wages she would still pay Elaine for, Friday and Camille for the hours she had worked. The account balance was not generous enough for symbolic gestures. This was not symbolic. Ruth taped the notice to the door. She called every phone customer. Most accepted Wednesday delivery. Mrs. Bell said, "I can wait for eggs, but I don't see why I should." Ruth donated the most perishable food to Camille's church kitchen, though she arranged for Pete to deliver it because appearing with crates might look like an attempt to purchase forgiveness. She called Janice and asked how badly 3 closed days would hurt. "That depends on why you're closing," Janice said. "I need to reorganize." "Will reopening improve the business?" "Yes." "Then it costs 3 days revenue." "That's your financial analysis?" "You already know the number. You're asking permission. Do I have it?" "No, it's your business." The answer steadied her. Camille returned the call Saturday afternoon. "I got your message. Thank you for calling. You sounded like you were reading a hostage statement." "I was trying not to explain myself. That must have hurt more than your chest." Ruth let the remark pass. "I closed for 3 days. I saw." "Would you meet me? For what?" "To discuss what I did and what would have to change." "You know what you did?" "Yes, I don't yet know everything that has to change." Camille was quiet. "Monday," she said. 10 o'clock. My house. Don't bring peaches." Camille lived in a brick duplex with yellow curtains and a porch crowded by potted herbs. She served Ruth coffee but nothing to eat, an omission so deliberate it almost qualified as a speech. Ruth brought a written list. Camille would control food purchasing within a weekly budget they set together. Ruth could question an order but could not secretly change it. Camille's title would be food manager. Her hourly pay would increase. And after the next 3 profitable months, she would receive a small percentage of prepared food profits. Camille read the page twice. "Profit share," she said. "If the food grows, your income should grow with it. You can't afford much." "No, you'll resent it, probably sometimes." Camille looked over her red glasses. "I don't wear glasses." Ruth blinked. That was Janice you just imagined. Despite herself, Ruth laughed. Camille did not. "What happens when we disagree in front of customers?" "We stop. One of us handles the customer. We discuss it privately." "And when you think I'm taking over?" "I say that, privately." "What happens when your chest hurts?" "I sit down." "You call somebody." "I sit first." "You call while sitting." Ruth nodded. Camille tapped the profit share paragraph. 4 months, not 3. "I want to know the suppers aren't weather. 3 months, 3.5. That isn't a normal period. Neither are you." They agreed on 3. Camille folded the paper. "I'm not coming back because you got sick." "I know. I'm coming back because this is a better job than the one I left." "It will be. If it isn't, I leave again." "I know that too." Ruth held out her hand. Camille looked at it, then pulled her into a brief, hard hug. "Now feed me," Camille said. "You still owe me lunch from the auction." Noah was more difficult. Ruth found him Tuesday evening loading his delivery truck behind the distributor's warehouse. She waited until he finished strapping a stack of crates. "I read your proposal," she said. "You read it before." "I skimmed it while looking for reasons to say no." "That's still reading. I was wrong to use your failed restaurant against you." His jaw tightened. "I was also wrong about the proposal," she continued. "The rent is low." He looked suspicious. "You came to apologize and raise it?" "The utilities are high." "Of course, but the space is empty, and food is selling. If the contractor confirms your improvement numbers, I want to discuss a lease." Noah leaned against the truck. "Because Camille told you?" "She thinks it's a good idea." "So do I. You said it frightened you." "It does." "That's not a qualification." "No, but fear isn't a veto anymore." He studied her face. "You look tired. I'm learning to sit. How's that going?" Slowly, Noah picked up another strap. "I'll bring a revised proposal Wednesday. Come before opening." "You reopening?" "Yes." "Camille?" "Yes." His shoulders eased. "Then I'll come." Wednesday morning, Ruth unlocked the door at 6:45. Camille entered carrying her apron. Noah arrived with new numbers. Elaine brought breakfast and announced she would work Fridays only if Ruth put her on payroll. Dennis came 10 minutes before opening with a padded stool behind the counter. Ruth looked at all of them. "I can't afford this much self-respect," she said. Camille tied her apron. "Raise the coffee 10 cents. At 7, Ruth turned the sign to open. For the first time, she did not stand in the doorway alone. The 10-cent coffee increase produced 3 complaints and no change in sales. Camille wrote the result on a note and taped it inside the cabinet where Ruth kept the cups. "See?" she had written. Ruth added underneath, "temporarily." Their disagreements became less graceful before they became easier. Camille wanted to replace the second soup day with baked pasta. Ruth thought pasta was cheap enough for people to make at home. Camille pointed out that coffee was also cheap at home, yet Pete bought it every morning and sat at the table criticizing theirs. They tested pasta. Pete bought 2. Ruth stopped changing orders after Camille left. When she questioned the amount of chicken one Thursday, they stepped into the back room, compared reservations, and reduced the order together by 1 case. The following week, Camille increased it again and was right. At the end of the 3rd profitable month, Ruth calculated Camille's share twice. The amount looked larger the second time. She wrote the check. Camille examined it at the counter. "You look ill. I'm looking at the money. You made money too. I could have made more. And done what with it? Bought more beans?" Ruth handed her the envelope. "Spend it irresponsibly. I intend to pay my electric bill with great recklessness." Noah's kitchen took longer. The rear floor had to be repaired before equipment could be installed. The wiring estimate rose after the electrician opened a wall and found another stretch Walter had repaired, according to principles known only to him. Noah kept his delivery job and spent weekends stripping old paint, laying out equipment in chalk, and calling contractors who did not call back. Ruth required every expense and responsibility in writing. Noah teased her about the length of the lease, then read it more carefully than Dennis had read the family sale agreement. "I can get out after a year," he asked, "if you give notice. And you can't throw me out because you decide you need the room for canned beans. Not unless the beans form a legal entity." He signed. Noah named the business Second Shift Kitchen. His first menu consisted of 4 suppers, 2 soups, and the biscuits. Paul praised so extravagantly that Elaine accused him of flirting with bread. The arrangement gave the market rent, prepared food, and someone in the building before dawn. It gave Noah a kitchen without the burden of dining room staff or a full commercial lease. He continued driving 3 delivery routes a week until sales became predictable enough to reduce his hours. They were never entirely predictable. A January snowstorm emptied the shelves of bread and milk before noon, then kept customers away for 2 days. The ancient furnace stopped on the coldest night. Ruth and Dennis sat beside it until 1 in the morning while a repairman searched for a part. "You should replace the whole unit," Dennis said. "With what money? The money you're making? I'm using it to purchase heat 1 piece at a time." He held a flashlight while the repairman worked. "Dad used to kick that panel. That was his approach to maintenance. Worked more often than it should have." The repairman struck the panel with the heel of his hand. The furnace started. Dennis looked pleased. You see, Ruth saw him more often, though rarely by invitation. He repaired a sagging shelf and refused payment. She wrote him a check anyway. He did not cash it. She entered it into the market books as an unpaid expense until he accused her of making his kindness look like debt. "That's what it is if you decide what I need and won't let me return anything," she said. He cashed the check. His flooring business survived the winter. 1 contractor paid half of an overdue account. Another vanished behind a new company name, leaving Dennis with materials he could not return. He spoke about it only in pieces, usually while fixing something. Ruth did not offer him money. She did send 2 market customers to him when they asked who had built the communal table. He won 1 flooring job and complained that the client had chosen gray vinyl designed to resemble wood that had been left outdoors. "Did the check clear?" Ruth asked. "Yes, then admire the gray." Elaine became the store's Friday cashier and unofficial listener. Customers told her things because she looked as if she had time. Ruth used to think this meant Elaine worked less. She learned it meant Elaine was doing work Ruth could not always see. Elaine learned to ask before rearranging displays. Ruth learned to let some displays remain rearranged. When the cardiology bill arrived, Ruth called Elaine and complained for 20 minutes about the cost of being told to rest. "You're resting now, though," Elaine said. "I'm sitting. Same family of activity." Ruth had seen her doctor, completed the recommended follow-up, and begun eating lunch before 3. Dennis's padded stool remained behind the counter. She used it when nobody was looking until Camille taped another note above it. "Sitting still counts if witnessed." The store did not become wildly profitable. Some weeks it barely cleared what it owed. The roof still needed full replacement within a year. Ruth drove her old car because the unnamed noise had settled into a harmless rattle, according to one mechanic, and an expensive mystery, according to another. But the market paid its bills. The account balance grew slowly. Ruth no longer woke every night, calculating electricity in the dark. She woke only on Thursdays, when the large delivery was due. Spring brought strawberries, muddy footprints, and customers asking for flowers that Ruth had not ordered. Second shift. Kitchen added cold salads and sold more than Ruth predicted. Noah hired a retired bakery worker for 10 hours a week. Camille trained her, then pretended not to be pleased when the woman improved Camille's biscuit method. The communal table collected regulars. Gloria and Val began playing cards there on Wednesdays. Owen folded his newspaper smaller without being asked. Mrs. Bell sat once, declared the chairs too low, and returned the next day with a cushion. Ruth's name became ordinary. People said they would meet at Ruth's. They asked whether Ruth's had soup left. Delivery customers wrote checks to Ruth's Market without pausing. The first time Ruth heard Dennis tell a flooring client, "You can leave the estimate for me at Ruth's," she looked up so quickly she struck her knee on the counter. He did not acknowledge it. The old green sign remained in the storeroom behind the milk crates. Ruth passed it when she checked paper goods inventory. Dust gathered again over Walter's gold letters. She considered moving it, but there was always something else to do. Elaine began talking about the first anniversary in May. "We should have a gathering. We have customers every day. They gather without balloons. 1 year matters. 1 year from opening or 1 year from Dad's funeral." Elaine grew quiet. Ruth regretted the question. "Opening. I meant opening. I know. Do you?" The old exchange had changed meaning between them. Ruth reached across the counter and squeezed Elaine's hand. They chose the Saturday closest to the opening date. Camille planned samples. Noah offered small biscuits and cups of soup. Val volunteered folding chairs from the laundromat, though nobody understood why a laundromat owned 23 folding chairs. Pete proposed a speech and was rejected unanimously. Dennis said little when Elaine described the plans. "You coming?" Ruth asked. "Probably. That means no when you say it. It means I'm checking my schedule. It's a Saturday. I work Saturdays." "So, does everybody in this building?" He looked up at the blue sign. 1 year? Almost. "You surprised?" "Yes." "Me too." It was not an insult. Ruth accepted it as the closest thing he could manage to congratulations. The week before the gathering, she found the milk crates moved in the back storeroom. A clean strip showed where the old sign had leaned. "Noah," she called, "did you move Dad's sign?" He came from the kitchen wiping his hands. "What sign?" "The Mercer's Market sign." "Green thing?" Dennis took it. "When?" "Sunday." Said he was fixing something. Ruth called Dennis. He answered on the 5th ring. "I'm under a floor. You took the sign. I borrowed it. It belongs to me. It belongs to the family. The building and everything in it were included in the sale. Please don't become a person who says included in the sale. Then don't take things from my storeroom. I'm repairing it. Why? It was falling apart. It has been falling apart for 18 years. Then I'm overdue." He refused to explain further. When Ruth asked whether he planned to bring it back, he said yes, and ended the call because somebody was waiting for him to finish the floor. She imagined the sign cleaned and returned to the storeroom. She imagined Dennis wanting it for his workshop. She did not imagine him replacing hers because he no longer owned the building, and because, despite their history, he had learned to knock before entering the apartment. She should have imagined more. The anniversary morning was bright and windy. Elaine tied blue and cream ribbons to the awning until Camille said the market looked like it was campaigning for mayor. Val arranged chairs on the sidewalk. Noah set biscuits on trays. Susan brought flowers in glass jars, deliberately smaller than funeral lilies. Customers filled the store before the announced start. People wrote memories of the first year on index cards Elaine had placed at the communal table. "Best cabbage in town," one said. Only cabbage in town, Camille wrote beneath it. Mrs. Bell wrote, bread improved. Ruth moved through the room. With a cup of coffee she kept setting down and losing. Her knee hurt. The loan was not paid off. The roof estimate waited upstairs. None of that weakened the pleasure of hearing the room alive. Dennis arrived late in his work truck. Susan saw him through the window and closed her eyes. What? Ruth asked. I told him to discuss it with you first. Dennis lowered the truck's tailgate. A long object lay beneath a canvas drop cloth. The room changed as people noticed. Pete went outside. Elaine followed, still holding a roll of ribbon. Dennis pulled away the canvas. The old Mercer's Market sign had been restored. The green paint shone. Walter's gold lettering had been repaired without correcting the tilted apostrophe. Dennis had reinforced the back and fitted new metal brackets along the top. For one aching moment, Ruth loved it. She saw Walter Young behind the counter, Tom carrying a box through the front door, Elaine in a summer dress, Dennis tall enough to reach the shelves she could not. She saw herself at 28 with a pencil behind her ear, totaling invoices while her father called the market his. People began applauding. Dennis smiled at Ruth, relieved, almost boyish. I found the same paint color. It's beautiful, she said. His smile widened. I knew you'd come around. The words chilled her pleasure. Two men from his crew climbed out of the truck. One carried a ladder. Ruth looked from the new brackets to the blue sign above the awning. Where are you putting it? Dennis's smile faltered. Where it belongs. Elaine stepped closer. Dennis, it's her anniversary gift. No, Ruth said. It isn't. Customers had gathered on the sidewalk. The applause died unevenly. Dennis lowered his voice. We talked about this. We argued about it. You've proved your point. The store works. You don't have to keep punishing Dad. My name isn't punishment. I didn't say that. You brought a crew to replace it without asking. He glanced at the old sign, then at the people watching. I thought you'd want the family back. Ruth stood beneath Ruth's Market while Walter's restored name waited in the truck. Dennis held out his hand toward the ladder. Take hers down, he said. No, Ruth said. Dennis kept his hand raised as if the crew might obey him before the word reached them. No one touches that sign. One of the men shifted the ladder against his shoulder. The other studied the sidewalk. Dennis's face darkened. Can we talk inside? Yes. He reached for the canvas. The green sign comes inside too, Ruth said. It's an exterior sign. I can see that. It weighs 80 pounds. Then it'll take 2 people. Pete stepped toward the truck. I'm one. Dennis blocked him with an arm. Nobody asked you. You brought it to a grocery store full of people. Pete, Ruth said. Pete stopped. His expression promised he had not stopped permanently. Ruth looked at the restored sign again. The work was careful. Dennis had repaired a split through the final T, matched Walter's uneven gold, and preserved every brushstroke he could. He had spent hours on it, probably after long days doing floors for customers who had not paid enough. It is beautiful, she said, then put it back. I want it above the table. Dennis stared at her. Inside? Yes. Like decoration, like history. It isn't history. It's the name of the store. It was. The word moved through the small crowd. Ruth heard someone shift a folding chair. Inside, the refrigerator compressor started, loud in the silence. Dennis lowered his voice. You're embarrassing me. I didn't bring a ladder. This was a gift. A gift doesn't decide where it lives after you give it. His gaze lifted to the blue sign. Dad gave you everything in that building. No, I bought your share of it. There it was, the sentence she had tried not to use. It sounded ugly in the sunlight, true and incomplete. Dennis flinched. Ruth stepped closer. You repaired his sign. I'm grateful. I mean that. I want it in the market where people can see it and remember him. But mine stays over the door. It looks ridiculous having 2 names. Then don't look through the window, Elaine whispered. Ruth. Ruth knew the last line had been unnecessary. She also knew apologizing now would be taken as surrender. Dennis's crew remained beside the truck. One of the men cleared his throat. Boss, you want us to set it inside? Dennis pulled the tailgate up so hard it bounced. No? He covered the sign with the canvas. Susan walked to him. Leave it. It's mine. You said it was a gift. She doesn't want it. I do, Ruth said. Not enough. Dennis climbed into the truck. Susan did not follow. He started the engine, forcing Pete to step away from the tailgate. The old sign disappeared down the street beneath the canvas, its new brackets flashing once in the sun. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then Mrs. Bell said, "Are we still getting samples?" Camille answered, "As long as you don't clap for them." People laughed with more relief than humor. Conversations resumed carefully. Noah passed biscuit trays. Val moved 2 chairs off the sidewalk and nearly struck Pete, who claimed he had been standing there first. Ruth went behind the counter and found her coffee cold. Elaine joined her. "You could have told him privately. He could have asked me privately. Both are true." Ruth looked through the window at the place where Dennis's truck had been. "I thanked him." "You also told him you bought his share." "I did," with the same voice Dad used when he reminded us whose roof we lived under. The comparison made Ruth set down the cup. "I wasn't going to let him replace my sign." "I didn't say you should." "Then what would you have done?" Elaine watched Paul break a biscuit in half over the table, scattering crumbs on the floor Camille had just swept. "I don't know," she said. "That's why I'm not pretending I would have done it better." Susan approached the counter. Her eyes were bright, but her voice remained steady. "He thought you'd be moved." "I was. That's not what he expected." "I know. He worked on that sign every night for 2 weeks. He never called me once. No. He wanted the reveal." Ruth glanced at the index cards scattered across the communal table. Dad liked reveals too, mostly when he was revealing what other people should do. Susan almost smiled. "Will you tell Dennis I meant what I said about the work?" "No." Ruth blinked. "You tell him when you're ready to tell him without an audience." Susan picked up a biscuit. "I'm staying. I brought flowers, and I intend to see them appreciated." The gathering recovered because ordinary needs did not pause for family injury. The coffee ran out. Noah burned 1 tray of biscuits while trying to answer a question about catering. Elaine's ribbons came loose in the wind and wrapped around Pete's ankle. Val found more tape. Customers kept writing on the index cards. "Thank you for answering the phone. Best soup when you're sick of cooking. You remember my order." 1 card contained only a name and an unpaid amount from Walter's old ledger. Ruth recognized the man who had written it. Before she could speak to him, he placed $40 in her hand. "I know it's not your debt," he said. "It was mine." Ruth put the money in the register under miscellaneous, and did not tell him Walter had probably forgotten it 30 years ago. Near the end, she found a card in Elaine's handwriting. "You stayed, then you chose to stay." Ruth folded it once and put it in her apron pocket. Dennis did not return that day. He did not answer Ruth's call. On Monday, he sent a text that said, "Busy." On Friday, Elaine worked the register but refused to relay messages. "You both know my number," she said. "Stop using me as a hallway." The green sign arrived the following Tuesday. Dennis's crew left it on the sidewalk before opening. No Dennis, no ladder, no note. The canvas had been folded neatly on top. Pete and Noah carried it inside. They leaned it against the communal table. "It goes above," Ruth said. "That wall needs anchors," Noah told her. "Can you do it? I make biscuits." "You also installed half the kitchen." "Badly, according to the inspector." He passed it, after commentary. Noah and Pete mounted the sign after closing. Camille stood beneath them, directing every inch. Ruth sat on Dennis's padded stool and did not pretend she could hold 80 pounds over her head. When they finished, Walter's gold letters stretched above the scarred wood he had once owned. The tilted apostrophe pointed down toward the table. Ruth switched off the front lights, leaving 1 row illuminated. The old sign looked at home. Dennis came Thursday at 6:20, 10 minutes before closing. He entered without work clothes or tools. Ruth was alone at the register while Camille finished inventory in the back and Noah cleaned his kitchen. He saw the sign immediately. "You hung it," I said I would. He walked to the table and touched the repaired T. "It's too low. It's 7 feet up. Pete could hit it with his head. Pete is 5'10". He imagines taller." Ruth waited. Dennis pulled out a chair but did not sit. "Susan says I owe you an apology. Susan said she wasn't carrying messages. She told me that too. Do you owe me one? I shouldn't have brought the crew." "No. I thought if it was already happening, you'd let it happen." "I know." He looked through the front window. From inside, Ruth's market appeared backward above the glass. "I hated that sign," he said. "Mine? It looked like you'd taken Dad's store and signed your name across it." "I did sign my name across it." "I know." He sat, Ruth came around the counter and took the chair opposite him. The store was quiet except for water running in Noah's sink. Dennis rubbed his palms together. Fine white flooring dust remained in the creases despite his clean shirt. Dad used to introduce me as the one who'd take over, he said. Did you know that? Yes. I didn't want the store. I knew that too. I wanted him to think I could run it. Different thing. Ruth rested her hands on the table. He'd call me to fix a hinge, Dennis continued, then spend 3 hours telling customers his son handled the building. You did the orders, the payroll, the books. But I tightened something and got a parade. You also stayed in town. You left because he wouldn't pay you properly. I left because I married Tom. You left 6 months before the wedding. She had forgotten Dennis knew that. Walter had refused to put Ruth on salary after she asked. He said family did not count hours. The next week, Ruth accepted a bookkeeping position in Dayton. Tom proposed in November. Over time, the order of events became a gentler story. Dad depended on you, Dennis said. More than he ever depended on me. I think he liked me better because I didn't know enough to frighten him. That's a cruel thing to say about yourself. It might be true. Ruth looked up at the green sign. Elaine thinks he didn't like her at all. He didn't understand Paul. He didn't try. No. The agreement settled without forgiveness. Dennis took a breath. When Dad died, selling the building made sense. I needed money. Elaine wanted you nearby. You had no job, no husband, no reason we could see to stay. You didn't look very hard. No. He picked at a dried spot of finish on the table. If you moved, then the story stayed simple. Dad had the market. Dad died. We sold it. The end. And if I opened it, then maybe it was never only his. Ruth felt the truth of that enter slowly, without triumph. Dennis looked toward the counter, the cooler, the doorway to second shift kitchen. Every time somebody said Ruth's, it sounded like proof. Of what? That he needed you more, that you were better at it, that I sold something I should have understood. I didn't understand it either. You understood enough. I made 6 crates of peach preserves at 2 in the morning. That does sound like Dad. I called Camille my help. That sounds worse. It was. Dennis nodded toward the old sign. I wasn't trying to erase you. You were trying to put Dad back on top. Yes. The plain admission hurt less than another explanation would have. Ruth reached into the register, removed a folder from beneath the cash tray, and placed it on the table. I need the upstairs kitchen floor replaced, she said. The hall, too. Water damage near the sink, worn boards by the stairs. Dennis did not open the folder. Are you giving me work because my business is bad? I'm asking for a quote because I've seen your work. You could ask somebody else. I am asking 2 other companies. His eyebrows lowered. You want me to bid? I want a written price, start date, finish date, and material warranty. If yours is best, the market hires you. If it isn't, it doesn't. That's cold. It's business. You're my sister. And you need paying work, not a family favor you can refuse to cash. He finally opened the folder. Inside were measurements, photographs, and the worn spot Ruth had marked with blue tape. You measured wrong, he said, then corrected in the quote. He closed the folder. I'll look Monday. Call first. I know where you live. Call first. He almost smiled. Fine. At the door, he stopped beneath the blue sign and looked back at the green one. It does look good there, he said. I know. Maybe 2 inches higher. Good night, Dennis. He left laughing quietly. His quote was not the lowest. It included better underlayment and a longer warranty, which he explained for 20 minutes without mentioning the competing bids. Ruth hired him on the written terms. He started at 8 on a Monday and finished on the Thursday he had promised. When Ruth paid the final invoice, he deposited the check that afternoon. The market continued without becoming easy. The roof fund grew by small deposits. Second Shift Kitchen added a Saturday breakfast that sold well, unless Noah experimented with healthy biscuits. Camille's profit share increased enough for her to complain about taxes. Elaine kept Fridays and occasionally spent the night upstairs, though she still suggested Ruth visit Kentucky more often. Ruth did. She also came home. One evening, after the last customer left, Ruth turned the sign to closed. Her knees ached, and a supplier invoice waited beside the register. Camille finished the accounts at the communal table beneath Mercer's Market. From the rear kitchen came Noah's voice and the clatter of pans. Dennis's new floor did not creak when Ruth crossed it. She paused at the front door. In the dark glass, the old family sign glowed inside the room, held among the people and work that had come after it. Above the entrance facing the street, the blue sign carried her own name. Ruth turned off the aisle lights and went upstairs because she lived there, because she had chosen the rooms and the loan and the aching days below them, not because there was nowhere else for her to go.